Welcome back to another evening of shared stories and adventures. Tonight we're diving into hours of Fallout mysteries no one can solve. I'll be covering all the major enigmas, unanswered questions, and head-scratching moments that I can fit in for tonight. So we'll start with the smaller curiosities and slowly move to the ones that keep the entire fandom awake at night. But if you like what I do here and want a way to support the channel, consider subscribing to me to see more. But for now, grab your blanket and your Pip-Boy, get cozy, and let's begin. The Fallout universe has always been a place where the answers are buried under 200 years of nuclear ash, corporate lies, and the kind of bureaucratic incompetence that makes you wonder how civilization even lasted as long as it did. The games, the lore, the environmental storytelling scattered across every terminal entry and holotape, they all paint a picture that's deliberately incomplete. Some mysteries were left open by design, little narrative threads meant to make you think, to theorize, to argue with strangers on forums at 3 in the morning. Others feel like accidents, like the developers forgot to tie up a loose end or ran out of time before launch. And then there are the mysteries that sit somewhere in between, the ones where you can almost see the answer. It's right there on the edge of your vision, but the moment you try to focus on it, it slips away into the fog. Tonight you're going to hear about the synth who might not be a synth, the vaults that were designed to answer questions nobody asked, and the single most haunting radio signal in gaming history. You'll learn why a teddy bear sitting on a toilet is actually a clue, why the developers hid an entire secret society in plain sight, and what really happened to the people who built the world before the bombs dropped. And here's the extra part, the thing that goes beyond the title. I'm going to walk you through one mystery that Bethesda accidentally confirmed in a patch note, then tried to pretend they didn't, and it changes the way you see an entire faction. Let's start with something small, something you've probably walked past 100 times without noticing. In Fallout 4, scattered across the Commonwealth, you'll find teddy bears. Lots of them, sitting in chairs propped up on shelves, arranged in little scenes that range from adorable to deeply unsettling. There's one in a classroom holding a knife. Another sitting in front of a chessboard, 2 of them in a bathtub, one on a toilet reading a newspaper. And the thing is, these aren't random. Someone at Bethesda spent time placing each one, posing it, building a tiny story around it. The community has documented hundreds of these scenes, cataloged them, tried to decode them. Some people think they're just environmental jokes, little moments of dark humor to break up the bleakness. Others believe they're marking something, pointing toward hidden loot or secret locations. And then there's a third group, the ones who think the teddy bears are telling a story about what happened in the moments before the bombs fell, a story about people trying to hold on to normalcy even as the world was ending. Here's the thing that makes it strange. In the game files, and the teddy bears have specific item codes, and some of them have names that don't match what you see in the game. One teddy bear, the one sitting on the toilet in the Beantown Brewery, is internally labeled as Witness. Another found in a destroyed playground is called Innocent. A third, slumped against a wall in a raider camp, is named Guilty. Those aren't random labels. Those are narrative tags. Someone was building a system, a way to mark these objects as part of a larger story. But if you play the game, if you pick up every teddy bear and read every terminal entry nearby, you won't find that story. It's not there. Or maybe it is and we just haven't figured out how to read it yet. The teddy bear mystery is small, almost cozy in its strangeness, but it sets the tone for everything else in Fallout. The world is full of stories that stop mid-sentence, questions that were asked but never answered, and details that feel significant but lead nowhere. And the deeper you dig, the more you realize that some of these mysteries weren't meant to be solved. They were meant to haunt you. Let's talk about the Dunwich Borers, a location in Fallout 4 that manages to be more unsettling than any horror game you've played this year. It's a quarry, or it was before the war, a place where workers dug deep into the earth looking for minerals. Now it's flooded, dark, and filled with ghouls and raiders who seem just a little too comfortable with the eldritch symbols carved into the walls. As you descend deeper into the quarry, the air changes, the music shifts. You start finding holotapes from workers who talked about hearing voices, seeing things in the dark, feeling watched. And at the very bottom, submerged in irradiated water, you find an altar. On that altar is a knife, glowing with a sickly green light, and if you pick it up, you get a weapon called Kremvai's Tooth, a sacrificial blade that does extra damage and makes enemies flee in terror. The name Kremve appears elsewhere in the Fallout universe. In Fallout 3, there's a location called the Dunwich Building, another dark, claustrophobic space filled with hallucinations and environmental storytelling that points toward something old, something that existed long before the bombs, maybe even before humanity. The terminals in the Dunwich Building reference a book, a pre-war text that drove people mad, and if you know your Lovecraft, you'll recognize the reference immediately. Kremvich is Fallout's version of a great old one, an entity that sleeps beneath the earth and whispers to those who get too close. The question is, how much of this is real within the game's universe? And how much is just the radiation playing tricks on people's minds? Here's where it gets strange. In the Dunwich borers, if you use a console command to drain the water at the bottom of the quarry, you can see the full altar. And carved into the stone barely visible is a symbol that matches one found in the Dunwich Building in Fallout 3. Same symbol, same design. Separated by hundreds of miles in two different games. That's not an accident. That's continuity. That's Bethesda telling you that whatever KremVH is, it's real, it's consistent, and it's still out there. But they never explain it. They never give you a quest to stop it or learn more about it. They just let it sit there, waiting. And that's so much worse than any explanation could be. The Dunwich locations are some of the most discussed mysteries in the Fallout community, and the theories range from grounded to completely unhinged. Some people think Kremve is just a pre-war cult, a group of people who worshipped something they didn't understand and left behind a bunch of creepy art. Others believe Kremve is a real entity, something that exists in the Fallout universe the same way Deathclaws and super mutants do, just older and stranger. And then there are the people who think Kremve is connected to the Zetans, the alien race that appears in Fallout 3's Mothership Zeta DLC, and that the symbols are some kind of warning or beacon. That last theory is a stretch, but in a universe where aliens are canon and you can find a crashed UFO with a working blaster inside, nothing is too weird to be possible. What makes the Dunwich mystery so effective is that it doesn't demand your attention. You can play through Fallout 4 and never visit the borers. You can go there, grab the knife, and leave without reading a single holotape. But if you do stop, if you take the time to listen to the audio logs and look at the carvings and notice the way the game's lighting shifts as you go deeper, you'll feel it. That sense that you're trespassing somewhere you shouldn't be. That you've stumbled onto something the game didn't want you to find. And when you leave, when you climb back up to the surface and see the sun again, you'll still feel like something followed you out. Now let's shift to a mystery that's less about atmosphere and more about pure narrative confusion. In Fallout 4, there's a character named Danse, a Brotherhood of Steel paladin who's loyal, disciplined, and completely committed to the Brotherhood's mission of hoarding technology and shooting anything that looks too mutated. You can recruit him as a companion, and if you follow his storyline, you'll eventually discover that Danse is a synth, a synthetic human built by the Institute, the very organization the Brotherhood is trying to destroy. This revelation breaks him. He doesn't remember being built, doesn't remember anything before joining the Brotherhood, and he's ready to die rather than live as the thing he's been trained to hate. Here's the problem. If Danse is a synth, and synths are built by the Institute, then the Institute knows where he is. They know he's in the Brotherhood. They've known for years, and they've done nothing about it. Synths are supposed to be the Institute's eyes and ears on the surface, their way of gathering information and manipulating events. But Danse isn't spying for the Institute. He's not sending reports or sabotaging the Brotherhood from within. He's just a soldier, doing his job, completely unaware of what he is. So why did the Institute make him? What's the point of building a synth, giving him false memories, and then just letting him wander off to join your enemy? The game never answers this. You can confront Father, the leader of the Institute, and he'll acknowledge that Danse is a synth, but he won't explain why Danse was created or what his purpose was supposed to be. Some fans think Danse was a prototype, an early experiment in creating synths that could pass as human, and the Institute just lost track of him. Others believe Dance was placed in the Brotherhood intentionally, not as a spy, but as a test, a way to see if a synth could integrate into human society without anyone noticing. And then there's the darker theory, the one that suggests Dance was never meant to be found out, that his entire existence is a long-term psychological experiment designed to see what happens when a synth discovers the truth about itself. What makes the Dance mystery so frustrating is that it's tied to one of the game's major factions, and yet it's treated like a side note. You can complete the Brotherhood quest line, destroy the Institute, and never get a clear answer about why Dance exists. The game gives you the option to spare him or execute him, but either way, the question remains. And if you dig into the game files, if you look at the cut content and unused dialogue, you'll find hints that there was supposed to be more to Dance's story. A deeper explanation that got trimmed for time or pacing. There are unused voice lines where Dance talks about feeling like he doesn't belong, about having dreams that don't match his memories, and about wondering if he's the only one. Those lines suggest that Bethesda had a bigger plan for Dance, a storyline that would have explored what it means to be a synth in a world that hates synths. But for whatever reason, that story never made it into the final game. The Dance mystery is a perfect example of how Fallout's narrative structure can work against itself. The game wants to tell you a story about identity and free will and the nature of consciousness, but it also wants to give you the freedom to ignore that story and go shoot raiders instead. So it compromises. It gives you just enough to make you curious, just enough to make you care, and then it steps back and lets you fill in the blanks. Some players love that approach. They see it as respectful, as trusting the audience to think for themselves. Others find it maddening, like being handed a puzzle with half the pieces missing and being told to figure it out. Let's move to something that's been debated since Fallout 3 launched, a mystery so simple and so strange that it's become one of the most iconic unsolved questions in the series. In Fallout 3, if you tune your Pip-Boy radio to a specific frequency, you'll pick up a signal called the Numbers Station. It's not music, it's not a distress call, it's just a voice, flat and emotionless, reading out a string of numbers. 3 dog, 4, alpha, 9, tango. Over and over in different combinations with no explanation and no context. The signal is always broadcasting, no matter where you are in the game, and if you listen long enough, you'll start to notice patterns. Some numbers repeat more than others. Some sequences seem to correspond to locations on the map. And if you're the kind of person who enjoys codes and ciphers, you'll spend hours trying to crack it. The community has been working on the Number Station since the game came out, and they've made some progress. By cross-referencing the numbers with in-game locations, some players discovered that certain sequences point to specific landmarks, places where you can find rare loot or hidden encounters. Others noticed that the station's broadcast changes slightly depending on where you are in the main quest, suggesting that it's tied to the story in some way. But here's the thing, no one has ever fully decoded it. No one has figured out what the complete message says, or if there even is a complete message. Bethesda has never commented on it, never confirmed or denied any of the theories, and the Numbers Station remains one of the most enduring mysteries in Fallout. What makes the Numbers Station so compelling is how real it feels. Number stations are a real thing, shortwave radio broadcasts used during the Cold War to send encrypted messages to spies in the field. They're eerie, impersonal, and deeply unsettling, and Bethesda captured that feeling perfectly. When you're wandering through the Capital Wasteland, alone in the dark, and you hear that voice reading out numbers, it doesn't feel like a game mechanic. It feels like you've stumbled onto something you weren't supposed to hear, like you're eavesdropping on a conversation that's still happening 200 years after the world ended. The theories about what the Number Station actually means are all over the map. Some people think it's a message from the Enclave, the remnants of the pre-war government, coordinating operations across the wasteland. Others believe it's automated, a pre-war system that's still running because no one ever shut it down, broadcasting orders to soldiers who died centuries ago. There's a particularly dark theory that suggests the numbers are coordinates for nuclear strikes that never happened, targeting cities that were already destroyed, a ghost protocol still trying to end a war that's already over. And then there are the people who think the Number Station is something else entirely, a message from outside the game world, a piece of meta-narrative that Bethesda included as an Easter egg for players who like to dig deeper than the surface level. Here's what we know for certain. The Number Station exists in the game files as a complete audio track, which means it was intentionally created and placed. It's not a bug or a glitch. Someone wrote those number sequences, someone recorded that voice, and someone decided where and when the signal would broadcast. In the years since Fallout 3 launched, data miners have pulled apart every line of code related to the Number Station, and they've found something interesting. The broadcast includes references to locations that don't exist in Fallout 3, places that only appear in later games or in the broader Fallout lore. That suggests the Number Station might have been intended as a long-term mystery, something that would pay off across multiple games, but if that's true, the payoff hasn't arrived yet. Fallout 4 has its own mysterious radio signals, but none of them connect directly to the Number Station. Fallout 76 introduced new lore about pre-war communications networks, but again, no clear link. The most frustrating part of the Number Station mystery is that it feels solvable. Like, it doesn't have the cosmic horror ambiguity of the Dunwich locations or the narrative gaps of the Dance storyline. It's just a code. And codes can be broken, but despite thousands of hours of collective effort from the community, despite spreadsheets and frequency analysis and pattern recognition algorithms, no one has cracked it. Maybe the code is more complex than anyone realized. Maybe it requires information from outside the game, some piece of context that Bethesda never provided. Or maybe, and this is the possibility that keeps people up at night, maybe there is no solution. Maybe the Number Station is just noise, a random string of numbers designed to look meaningful, and the real mystery is why we're so desperate to find meaning in it. Let's talk about the vaults, because no discussion of Fallout mysteries would be complete without them. The vaults were sold to the American public as survival shelters, places where people could ride out the nuclear war and emerge when it was safe. But the truth, as you learn pretty quickly in any Fallout game, is that the vaults were never about survival. They were experiments, each one designed to test a different variable, to see how humans would react under specific conditions. Vault 11 forced its residents to sacrifice one person each year or face extermination. Vault 12 had a door that didn't seal properly, exposing everyone inside to radiation. Vault 108 was populated entirely with clones of one man named Gary. The experiments ranged from psychological torture to bizarre social engineering, and almost none of them had anything to do with actually surviving a nuclear war. The question that haunts the Vault system is simple. Why? What was the point? The official explanation, the one you can piece together from terminal entries and holotapes, is that the Vaults were part of a long-term plan to colonize other planets. The idea was that humanity would need to survive in isolated, enclosed environments for generations, and the Vault experiments were designed to test which social structures and psychological conditions would work best for a colony ship. It's a cold, utilitarian logic, the kind of thinking that sacrifices thousands of lives in the name of data collection. But here's the problem with that explanation. It doesn't account for the vaults that had no scientific value, the ones that were just cruel for the sake of cruelty. Take Vault 11, the one where residents had to vote for someone to die each year. The twist, the thing that makes it so devastating, is that the vault's computer was programmed to stop the killings if the residents ever refused to choose. All they had to do was say no and everyone would live. But they didn't know that. They spent years murdering each other, building political factions around who would die next, tearing their society apart. And when they finally discovered the truth, when they realized that every death had been pointless, only 5 people were left. 4 of them decided to leave the vault. The 5th, overwhelmed by guilt, stayed behind and eventually took his own life. You find his skeleton sitting in front of a terminal, and if you read his final entry, it's just one sentence. We could have just said no. What data could possibly be worth that? What variable were they testing? The Vault experiment logs, the ones you can find scattered across the games, don't provide a clear answer. Some vaults were testing social cohesion under stress, others were testing genetic diversity or leadership structures or the effects of isolation. But Vault 11 doesn't fit any of those categories. It's not testing anything useful. It's just watching people destroy themselves, and the only conclusion you can draw is that whoever designed the experiment wanted to see if they would. That's not science. That's sadism with a clipboard. The vault experiments are one of the most discussed aspects of Fallout lore, and the community has spent years trying to make sense of them. Some people think the experiments were designed by the Enclave, the shadow government that survived the war, as a way to identify the strongest and most adaptable humans for their own purposes. Others believe the experiments were meant to fail, that the real goal was to create chaos and ensure that no organized resistance could form in the aftermath of the war. And then there's the theory that the vaults were never about colonization at all, that the space program was just a cover story, and the real purpose was to see how far you could push people before they broke. Here's the thing that makes the vault mystery so unsettling. In Fallout 2, you meet remnants of the Enclave, and they talk about the vaults like they're proud of them. They describe the experiments as necessary as the price of progress, and they genuinely believe that the data collected was worth the cost. But when you ask them what they learned, when you push them to explain what all that suffering actually accomplished, they don't have a good answer. They talk in vague terms about resilience and adaptability, but they can't point to a single concrete outcome. The vaults didn't lead to a colony ship. They didn't create a new society. They just killed a lot of people and traumatized the survivors, and the people responsible act like that was the plan all along. One vault that stands out as particularly strange is Vault 77, which you never actually visit in any of the games, but you hear about through environmental storytelling. In Fallout 3, you can find a unique item called the Vault 77 jumpsuit, and if you read the terminal entries nearby, you'll learn that Vault 77 had only one human resident and a crate full of puppets. That's it, one person alone, with nothing but puppets for company. The experiment was designed to study extreme isolation to see what would happen to someone who had no human contact for years. And what happened, according to the fragmented stories you can piece together, is that the resident went completely insane, started treating the puppets as real people, and eventually escaped the vault and became a violent raider. The Vault 77 story is told through a series of holotapes and terminal entries, and it's one of the darkest things in the entire series. You hear the resident talking to the puppets, giving them names and personalities, arguing with them, apologizing to them, and as time goes on, the tone shifts. The resident starts talking about the puppets like they're plotting against him, like they're whispering when he's not listening. He describes elaborate conversations and betrayals, entire dramas playing out between inanimate objects. And then, in the final entry, he talks about how he's going to leave the vault, how the puppets told him it was time, and how he needs to find other people so he can make them understand. The entry ends mid-sentence, and you never find out what happened next. The reason Vault 77 is so effective is that you never see it. You never walk through the halls or find the puppets or meet the resident. You just hear the echoes, the stories that other people tell about the man in the Vault 77 jumpsuit, and every story makes him sound more dangerous and more tragic. In Fallout 3, if you wear the Vault 77 jumpsuit, certain NPCs will react with fear, backing away and refusing to talk to you. That's not a gameplay mechanic. That's the game acknowledging that the legend of Vault 77 exists in the world, that people have heard the stories, and they're terrified of anyone who came from that place. It's environmental storytelling at its best, a mystery that's more powerful because it's incomplete. Let's shift to a mystery that's less about horror and more about pure confusion. In Fallout New Vegas, there's a location called the Sierra Madre Casino, and it's the setting for the Dead Money DLC. The Sierra Madre was built by a man named Frederick Sinclair, a pre-war industrialist who wanted to create the perfect casino, a place where people could escape the world and lose themselves in luxury. But Sinclair had a problem. He was in love with a woman named Vera Keyes, a singer and actress, and he built the entire casino as a gift for her. He filled it with cutting-edge technology, holographic security systems, and a vault that could only be opened with a specific combination of biometric data. And then, right before the grand opening, the bombs fell, and the Sierra Madre became a tomb, The mystery of the Sierra Madre isn't what happened to Sinclair or Vera. The DLC tells you that story in painful detail. The mystery is what the Sierra Madre actually is, because the more you explore the casino, the more you realize that it doesn't make sense. The technology inside is decades ahead of anything else in the pre-war world. The holograms are solid, capable of killing you with a touch. The vending machines can create food, medicine, or an ammunition out of thin air using a currency called Sierra Madre chips. The cloud, a toxic red mist that fills the streets around the casino, is unlike any other environmental hazard in the Fallout universe. It's not radiation, it's not a chemical weapon, it's something else. Something that was created specifically for the Sierra Madre and nowhere else. Here's where it gets strange. In the Sierra Madre's vault, if you read the terminal entries, you'll find references to a project called the Big Empty, which is the setting for another New Vegas DLC called Old World Blues. The Big Empty was a pre-war research facility where scientists conducted experiments that make the vault experiments look tame by comparison. They built weapons that could erase people from existence, created artificial intelligence that went insane, and performed surgeries that turned humans into cyborgs. And according to the terminal entries, Frederick Sinclair had connections to the Big Empty. He funded some of their research, provided them with resources, and in exchange, they gave him access to their technology. That's how he built the Sierra Madre. That's how he created holograms that can kill and vending machines that violate the laws of thermodynamics. But here's the thing. The game never explains, why did the scientists at the Big Empty help him? What did they get out of it? The Sierra Madre was a vanity project, a rich man's love letter to a woman who didn't love him back. It had no military value, no strategic importance, and no connection to the government contracts that funded the Big Empty. So why would a top-secret research facility risk exposing their technology just to help one guy build a casino? The game hints at an answer, suggests that Sinclair was blackmailing them or that they saw the Sierra Madre as a testing ground for their inventions. But it never commits to an explanation. And the more you think about it, the less sense it makes. The Sierra Madre mystery is compounded by the fact that the casino is still operational 200 years after the bombs fell. The holograms still patrol the halls, the vending machines still work, and the vault is still sealed. That level of preservation is unheard of in the Fallout universe. Most pre-war technology has broken down or been scavenged by now, but the Sierra Madre is pristine, like it's been waiting for someone to arrive. And when you finally open the vault, when you see what's inside, it's not weapons or data or anything useful. It's gold bars, hundreds of them. More wealth than you could ever carry. And the game makes it almost impossible to take them with you because they're too heavy, and the casino is collapsing and you have to choose between greed and survival. The Dead Money DLC ends with a message, a quote that appears on screen as you leave the Sierra Madre. Begin again, but know when to quit. It's a reference to gambling, to knowing when to walk away from the table, but it's also a commentary on the entire Fallout series. The world ended because people didn't know when to quit, didn't know when to stop building bigger weapons and running crueler experiments and chasing after things they didn't need. The Sierra Madre is a monument to that failure, a beautiful, deadly trap that promises everything and delivers nothing. And the mystery of why it exists, why Sinclair built it, and why the Big Empty helped him is left for you to interpret. There's a character in Fallout New Vegas who might be the most mysterious person in the entire series, and most players never even realize it. His name is Mr. House, and on the surface he's easy to understand. He's a pre-war genius, a tech mogul who predicted the nuclear war and built an army of robots to protect Las Vegas from the bombs. He's been alive for over 200 years, kept in a state of suspended animation by a life support system, and he rules New Vegas from the Lucky 38 casino like a king in a tower. You can work for him, betray him, or kill him, and each choice leads to a different ending. Simple enough? Except nothing about Mr. House is simple, and the more you learn about him, the less sense he makes. Let's start with the basic timeline. Robert House was born in 20 grew up to become one of the richest men in America, and by 2065 he'd founded Robco Industries, a robotics and software company that became one of the most powerful corporations in the world. He made his fortune selling computers, robots, and operating systems to the military, and he used that fortune to buy up most of Las Vegas. In 2065, he calculated that nuclear war was inevitable, and he spent the next 12 years preparing. He built an army of Securitrons, upgraded the Lucky 38's defenses, and installed himself in a cryogenic life support chamber. When the bombs fell in 2077, his systems detected the launches and shot down most of the missiles aimed at Vegas. A few got through, but the city survived mostly intact. House went into hibernation, his systems monitoring the wasteland, waiting for the right moment to wake up and rebuild civilization. That's the story he tells you, and most of it checks out. You can find evidence of Robco's pre-war dominance, see the Securitrons in action, and confirm that Vegas took less damage than almost anywhere else. But here's the first problem. House claims he calculated the exact date of the nuclear war years in advance, that he knew it was coming and prepared accordingly. But if you dig into the pre-war lore, if you read the terminal entries in other games and piece together the timeline, you'll find that the nuclear war wasn't predictable, it wasn't a slow escalation or a planned strike. It was chaos. A series of accidents and miscommunications that spiraled out of control in a matter of hours. The bombs fell on October 23, 2077, and according to every other source in the Fallout universe, nobody saw it coming. Not the government, not the military, not the corporations, so how did House know? The game never answers this. House talks about statistical models and probability matrices, about analyzing global tensions and resource scarcity, but that's not enough. You can't predict the exact day of a nuclear war unless you have inside information, unless you know something that nobody else knows. And that raises a question that the game refuses to address. Was House just incredibly smart, or was he involved? Did he predict the war, or did he help cause it? There's a theory, and it's one of those theories that sounds insane until you start looking at the evidence that Robert House was connected to the Enclave. The Enclave, remember, is the shadow government that survived the war, the people who knew the bombs were coming because they were the ones who made sure it happened. They had access to vaults, to oil rigs, to technology that let them ride out the apocalypse in comfort. And they had connections to every major corporation in America, including Robco. If House was working with the Enclave, if he knew about their plans, that would explain how he predicted the war. It would also explain why he survived when so many other pre-war elites didn't. But the game never confirms this. House never mentions the Enclave, and the Enclave never mentions House. The connection exists only in the gaps, in the things that don't quite add up. Here's another problem. House claims that his Securitron shot down most of the missiles aimed at Vegas, but if you look at the city, if you explore the surrounding area, you'll find that the damage pattern doesn't match that story. The missiles that hit Vegas didn't explode on impact. They detonated in the air, spreading radiation over a wide area, but leaving the buildings mostly intact. That's not what happens when a defense system shoots down a missile. When you intercept the nuke, it either explodes where it is, causing massive damage, or it falls to the ground as a dud. It doesn't detonate in a controlled airburst pattern designed to minimize structural damage. The only way you get that result is if someone reprogrammed the missiles, changed their detonation altitude, turned them from city killers into area denial weapons. And the only person with the technical skill and the motive to do that is House himself. If that's true, if House didn't shoot down the missiles but instead hacked them and changed their targeting parameters, then his entire story is a lie. He didn't save Vegas. He just made sure it died slowly instead of all at once. And that would make sense in a cold, calculating way because House didn't need Vegas to survive intact. He needed it damaged enough that nobody else would want it, but functional enough that he could rebuild it when he was ready. A city that took a direct hit would be worthless, a radioactive crater with nothing to salvage. But a city that took a glancing blow, that lost its people but kept its infrastructure, that's something you can work with. That's something you can turn into a kingdom. The evidence for this theory is circumstantial, but it's there. In the Lucky 38, if you access House's personal terminals, you'll find files labeled Project Safeguard that reference missile interception protocols. But if you read the actual code, if you understand what it's doing, you'll see that it's not a defense system. It's a hacking tool designed to infiltrate military networks and alter targeting data. The files are encrypted, and most players never bother to decode them, but the people who have, the ones who've spent hours pulling apart the game's data, they've found something disturbing. The code in Project Safeguard matches the code used by Chinese stealth technology, the same technology that appears in Fallout 3's Operation Anchorage DLC. That means House had access to enemy systems, that he could manipulate both American and Chinese missiles, and that he had the ability to control the war itself. Now, you might be thinking, if House could control the missiles, why didn't he just stop the war entirely? Why let the bombs fall at all? And that's the question that makes this theory so dark, because maybe House didn't want to stop the war. Maybe he saw the nuclear apocalypse as an opportunity, a chance to wipe the slate clean and rebuild the world according to his vision. House talks a lot about humanity's potential, about how the old world was held back by democracy and bureaucracy and short-term thinking. He believes that progress requires a single guiding intelligence, someone who can make the hard decisions without worrying about elections or public opinion. And what better way to create that world than to destroy the old one and position yourself as the only person with the resources and knowledge to build something new? This is speculation, of course. The game never confirms that House manipulated the war, and Obsidian Entertainment, the developers of New Vegas, have never commented on it. But the pieces are there, scattered across terminals and dialogue trees and environmental details, and they paint a picture of a man who's far more dangerous than he appears. House presents himself as humanity's savior, the one person who can restore civilization. But if you look closely, if you question his story, you start to see the cracks. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. Let's talk about the Strip itself, because there's a mystery there that's been hiding in plain sight since the game launched. The Strip is the heart of New Vegas, 3 casinos that House restored and reopened after he woke from hibernation. The Tops, Gomorrah, and the Ultra Lux, each one run by a different tribe that House recruited from the wasteland. He gave them pre-war clothes, taught them how to run a casino, and turned them into the foundation of his new society. It's a brilliant piece of social engineering, taking violent tribals and transforming them into something that resembles civilization. But here's the thing that doesn't make sense. The Strip uses bottle caps as currency, the same currency used everywhere else in the wasteland, but House also created his own money, the New Vegas chip. You find them everywhere, in slot machines and on tables and in the pockets of NPCs. But nobody uses them. Nobody treats them as valuable. They're just junk items, worth a few caps if you sell them to a vendor. Why would House create a currency that nobody uses? The obvious answer is that he intended the chips to replace caps, to establish an economic system that he controlled, but something went wrong. Maybe the tribes didn't trust the chips, or maybe the NCR, the new California Republic that's trying to annex Vegas, refused to recognize them. But if you read the terminals in the Lucky 38, if you access House's economic projections, you'll find something strange. The chips were never meant to be a replacement currency. They were meant to be a tracking system. Each chip has a unique serial number, and House's computers log every transaction. Every time a chip changes hands, he's not trying to control the economy, he's trying to map it to understand who's trading with whom and how resources are flowing through the city. That's surveillance on a level that makes the pre-war government look amateur. House isn't just running Vegas, he's studying it, treating the entire city as a laboratory and the people as test subjects. And the scary part is that it's working. House knows more about the people on the Strip than they know about themselves. He knows who's loyal, who's planning a betrayal, who's skimming profits, and who's sleeping with whom. He uses that information to maintain control, to play the tribes against each other, to ensure that nobody ever gets powerful enough to challenge him, and the people living on the Strip have no idea. They think they're free, think they're building something new, but they're just rats in a maze, and House is taking notes. The New Vegas chip mystery is one of those things that seems minor until you realize the implications. It's not about money, it's about power, about information, about the ability to see everything and control everything without anyone noticing. And it raises a question that the game never addresses. If House is willing to surveil his own people, if he's willing to treat them as experimental subjects, what else is he willing to do? What other systems has he put in place that we haven't noticed? And if you side with House, if you help him take control of the Mojave, are you building a better future? Or are you just giving a dictator the tools he needs to perfect his control? There's a location in Fallout 4 that most players visit once and never think about again, but it contains one of the strangest mysteries in the series. It's called the Cabot House, and it's home to a family that's been alive since before the war. Not ghouls, not synths, just humans who stopped aging sometime in the 1890s. The Cabots are led by Jack Cabot, a scientist and archaeologist, and if you complete his questline, you'll learn that the family's immortality comes from a serum derived from an ancient artifact, a crown that Jack's father found in a pre-human city buried beneath the Arabian desert. The crown is thousands of years old, possibly millions, and it grants its wearer incredible psychic powers along with eternal life. But it also drives them insane, filling their mind with alien thoughts and incomprehensible visions. The Cabot House questline is short, maybe an hour if you take your time, and it ends with you either destroying the crown or keeping it intact. But the mystery isn't what happens in the quest. The mystery is what the crown actually is and where it came from. The game gives you hints, drops references to a lost civilization that predates humanity, but it never explains. Jack talks about the city where his father found the crown, describes architecture that doesn't match any known culture, and mentions symbols that appear in other Fallout games, specifically in the Dunwich locations. That's not a coincidence. That's Bethesda telling you that the crown, the Cabot family, and the Lovecraftian horror lurking beneath the Fallout universe are all connected. Here's what we can piece together from the evidence. The crown is not human-made. It's a relic from something older, something that existed on Earth long before humans evolved. The symbols on the crown match the symbols in the Dunwich building and the Dunwich borers, which means whatever made the crown also made those places. And if you remember, those locations are connected to Kremvi Hodge, the entity that whispers to people and drives them mad. So the crown might be a piece of Kremvi, or a tool used to communicate with it, or a prison designed to contain it. The game doesn't say, but the implications are clear. There's something ancient and malevolent buried in the Fallout universe, something that's been there longer than the bombs, longer than America, longer than human civilization, and it's still active. The Cabot family mystery is frustrating because it's so disconnected from the rest of Fallout 4. You can complete the main story, join every faction, explore every location, and never once hear about the Cabots or the Crown or the Lost City. It's a side quest, a curiosity, something you stumble across and then forget. But it's also one of the most significant pieces of lore in the series because it suggests that the Fallout universe is bigger and stranger than we thought. The nuclear war, the vaults, the super mutants, all of that is just surface-level chaos. Underneath, there's something else, something that was here first and might still be here when everything else is gone. The theories about the Cabot crown range from grounded to completely wild. Some people think the crown is a piece of Zetan technology, that the aliens visited Earth thousands of years ago and left behind artifacts that primitive humans mistook for magic. That theory has some support, because the Zetans are canon in Fallout, and we know they've been observing Earth for centuries. In Fallout 3's mothership, Zeta DLC, you find audio logs that prove the aliens were abducting humans as far back as the Old West, so it's not impossible that they left something behind even earlier. But the crown doesn't look like Zetan technology. It's ornate, organic, covered in symbols that feel more mystical than scientific. If the Zetans made it, they were trying very hard to make it look like something else. Another theory suggests the crown is a remnant of a pre-human civilization, something that evolved on Earth before humans and either died out or left the planet. This theory draws heavily from Lovecraft, specifically the idea of the Elder Things. a race of ancient beings who built cities and conducted experiments and eventually vanished, leaving only ruins and artifacts behind. The Fallout universe has always had Lovecraftian undertones. The Dunwich locations make that explicit, but the Cabot Crown takes it further. It suggests that the horror isn't just atmospheric, isn't just a creepy Easter egg. It's real, it's physical, and it's been influencing human history for thousands of years. Here's the detail that makes the Cabot mystery even stranger. If you kill Lorenzo Cabot, Jack's father, the man who's been wearing the crown and slowly going insane, Jack will continue producing the serum that grants immortality. He'll offer to sell it to you, a few doses at a time, and if you keep buying it, if you use it regularly, your character will stop aging. The game doesn't make a big deal out of this. There's no special dialogue, no acknowledgement that you've become immortal. But the effect is there, coded into the game, and it raises a question that nobody seems to be asking. If the serum works, if it can grant eternal life without the crown, then why isn't everyone using it? Why isn't the Institute mass-producing it? Why isn't the Brotherhood trying to steal the formula? The serum is the most valuable substance in the Fallout universe, more important than fusion cores or stim packs or even clean water, and yet it's treated like a minor side effect of a minor quest. The answer, or at least the implied answer, is that the serum is dangerous in ways the game doesn't fully explain. Lorenzo Cabot lived for over 200 years, and by the end, he was barely human. He could kill with a thought, could sense things happening miles away, could speak languages that didn't exist. The crown changed him, and the serum carries that change. If you use it, if you keep using it, you might live forever, but you might also become something else. The game doesn't explore this, doesn't give you a quest line where you slowly lose your humanity, but the implication is there. Immortality in the Fallout universe isn't a gift, it's a curse, and the Cabots are proof. Let's move to a mystery that's been debated since Fallout 4 launched, one that cuts to the heart of the game's central conflict. The Institute, the underground organization that builds synths and conducts experiments on the surface, is led by a man called Father. When you finally meet him after hours of searching and fighting your way through the Commonwealth, you discover that Father is your son, Sean. The baby who was kidnapped from Vault 111 at the beginning of the game, except he's not a baby anymore, he's an old man, dying of cancer because 60 years have passed while you were frozen in cryo. It's a gut punch of a reveal, one of the most effective emotional moments in the series, and it reframes the entire game. You weren't looking for your son. You were looking for the man who's been orchestrating everything, and he's been watching you the entire time. But here's the problem. The timeline doesn't add up. According to the game, you were frozen in Vault 111 in 2077, the day the bombs fell. You were woken up briefly in 2227, just long enough to watch Sean being taken and your spouse being killed, and then you were frozen again. You finally escaped the vault in 2287, 60 years after Sean was kidnapped. That means Sean is 60 years old when you meet him, which matches his appearance. But if you dig into the Institute's records, if you read the terminal entries and listen to the holotapes, you'll find references to projects and experiments that Sean was involved in decades before he became father. There are logs from the 2250s, 30 years after he was kidnapped, where Sean is already a senior scientist, already making decisions about synth development and surface operations. That would make him a senior scientist at age 30, which is possible, but the logs describe him as experienced, as someone who's been with the Institute for years. The math doesn't work. Some players think this is just a continuity error, a mistake that Bethesda made when they were building the timeline. But others believe it's intentional, that the discrepancy is a clue, because there's another possibility, one that the game hints at but never confirms. What if the Sean you meet isn't your son? What if he's a synth, a copy created by the Institute to manipulate you? The Institute has the technology to build perfect replicas of humans, complete with memories and personalities. They've done it before. Synths walk around the Commonwealth pretending to be people they're not, and nobody can tell the difference. So why couldn't they do the same thing with Sean? The evidence for this theory is scattered throughout the game. First, there's the synth child you meet in the Institute. A boy who looks exactly like Sean would have looked at age 10. Father tells you that the synth was created as a test, a way to see If the Institute could build a child that would grow and develop like a real human? But the synth doesn't age. It's stuck at 10 years old, frozen in time. Father says this is a flaw, a limitation of synth technology. But what if it's not? What if the synth child is the real Sean, the one who was kidnapped from the vault, and the old man calling himself Father is the copy? Here's how it would work. The Institute takes baby Sean from the vault in 2027. They raise him, study him, use his DNA to perfect their synth technology. But at some point, maybe when Sean is 10 or 12, something goes wrong. Maybe he gets sick. Or maybe he tries to escape. Or maybe the Institute just decides he's more useful as a template than as a person. So they scan his brain, copy his memories, and create an adult synth programmed to believe he's the real Sean. They age the synth artificially, give it cancer to explain why it's dying, and set it up as the leader of the Institute. Meanwhile, the real Sean, the child, is kept in storage, a backup in case they need him. And when you arrive, when you start tearing through the Commonwealth looking for your son, the Institute activates their plan. They let you find them, let you meet Father, and use your emotional connection to manipulate you into helping them. The game never confirms this. Father insists he's real, and there's no way to test him, no way to prove he's a synth. But there are hints, little details that don't quite fit. Father knows things about your life before the war, things that only Sean would know, but those memories could have been extracted from your brain while you were frozen in the vault. The Institute had access to Vault 111 for decades. They could have scanned you, copied your memories, and used them to make Father's story more convincing. And then there's the way Father talks about the Institute, the way he describes it as his real family, more important than you, more important than the surface world. That's not how a kidnapped child would think. That's how a synth programmed to serve the Institute would think. The father synth theory is one of the most divisive in the Fallout community. Some people love it, think it adds a layer of tragedy and paranoia to the story. Others hate it, think it undermines the emotional core of the game, but whether you believe it or not, the theory points to a larger problem with Fallout 4's narrative. The game is built around the question of what makes someone human, whether synths deserve rights, whether they're people or property. But it never commits to an answer. It gives you factions with different perspectives, lets you choose which one to support, and then ends without resolving the question. And that ambiguity, that refusal to take a stance, is either brilliant or frustrating depending on how you look at it. There's a character in Fallout 3 who appears for less than 5 minutes and has sparked more theories than some entire quest lines. His name is the Mysterious Stranger, and he's not unique to Fallout 3. He's been in every game since the original Fallout in 1997. If you take the Mysterious Stranger perk, there's a chance that during combat, a man in a trench coat and fedora will appear out of nowhere, fire a few shots at your enemies, and then vanish before you can talk to him. He doesn't say anything, doesn't explain who he is or why he's helping you, and he's accompanied by a distinctive musical sting, a little guitar riff that plays every time he shows up. He's a gameplay mechanic, a random event designed to give you an edge in tough fights, but the community has spent decades trying to figure out who he is and why he exists. The Mysterious Stranger has appeared in every mainline Fallout game, always with the same appearance, always with the same guitar riff, always vanishing without explanation. That consistency suggests he's not just a random wastelander. He's something more, something that exists across time and space and different versions of the Fallout universe. Some people think he's a ghost, a spirit that helps the worthy and punishes the wicked. Others believe he's a time traveler, someone who's seen the future and is trying to nudge events in the right direction. And then there are the people who think he's not human at all, that he's a glitch in the simulation, a piece of code that gained sentience and decided to help the player character for reasons we can't understand. In Fallout 4, Bethesda added a new wrinkle to the mystery. If you take the Mysterious Stranger perk and then explore the game world, you'll occasionally find a man following you. He stays at a distance, never gets close enough to talk to, and if you approach him, he disappears. But if you're fast, if you use console commands to freeze him in place, you can get close enough to see his face. And it's the Mysterious Stranger, the same model, the same outfit, watching you from the shadows. That's not a random encounter, that's intentional. Bethesda programmed the mysterious stranger to stalk you, to observe you, and the implication is that he's always been there, even when you don't see him. The theories about the mysterious stranger's identity are all over the place, but there's one that's gained traction in recent years. In Fallout 4, there's a private investigator named Nick Valentine, a synth with the memories of a pre-war detective. If you complete Nick's personal quest, you'll learn about a case he never solved. A series of murders committed by someone called Eddie Winter, a gangster who made himself immortal through a combination of radiation and pre-war science. Nick has been hunting Eddie for decades, and when you finally track him down, you discover that Eddie is a ghoul, still alive, still dangerous, still unrepentant. You can kill him, and Nick will thank you, but the quest ends with a strange detail. Nick mentions that someone else has been hunting Eddie, someone who's been leaving clues and helping Nick without revealing themselves. And if you pay attention, if you notice the way the game frames that conversation, you'll realize that Nick is describing the mysterious stranger. The connection between Nick Valentine and the mysterious stranger is never made explicit, but the pieces are there. Both are associated with detective noir aesthetics. Both appear in moments of crisis, and both seem to exist outside the normal rules of the Fallout universe. Some fans believe that the mysterious stranger is Nick's pre-war counterpart, the original detective whose memories were copied to create the synth. Others think the stranger is a different synth, one created by the Institute as a failsafe, programmed to intervene when certain conditions are met. And then there's the theory that the mysterious stranger is the player character from a previous Fallout game, someone who completed their story and then found a way to exist outside time, helping other versions of themselves across different playthroughs. That last theory sounds absurd, but it's supported by a weird detail in Fallout 4's code. The mysterious stranger's character file includes a hidden stat called quantum state, which is set to a value that doesn't correspond to anything else in the game. Data miners have tried to figure out what quantum state means, and the best guess is that it's a flag that marks the stranger as existing in multiple places at once, as being both present and absent until observed. That's a reference to quantum mechanics, specifically the idea of superposition, and it suggests that the mysterious stranger isn't bound by normal causality. He's not traveling through space or time. He's existing in all spaces and all times simultaneously, and he only collapses into a single location when you need him. If that's true, if the mysterious stranger is a quantum entity, then he's not a character in the traditional sense. He's a narrative device, a piece of the game's structure that's become self-aware. And that raises a question that's equal parts fascinating and terrifying. If the mysterious stranger knows he's in a game, if he understands that the Fallout universe is a constructed reality, what else does he know? Does he know about the player, the person sitting behind the screen? Does he know that every choice you make, every quest you complete, is being guided by someone outside the game world? And if he knows, why is he helping you? What does he want? The mysterious stranger mystery is one of those things that Bethesda will probably never explain, because the moment they give you a concrete answer, the magic disappears. He's more effective as a question than he would be as a solution. But that doesn't stop people from looking, from analyzing every frame of his appearances, from building elaborate theories about his true nature. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the mysterious stranger exists to remind you that the Fallout universe is bigger than you think, that there are forces at work you don't understand, and that sometimes the best stories are the ones that refuse to end. Let's talk about Vault-Tec, the company that built the vaults, because there's a mystery at the heart of their entire operation that nobody seems to be asking about. We know the vaults were experiments. We know they were designed to test human behavior under extreme conditions. We know the data was supposed to be used for a space colonization program. But here's the question that should keep you up at night. Who was supposed to read the data? The vaults were sealed before the bombs fell, and most of them weren't scheduled to open for decades, some for centuries. The Enclave survived the war, but they were scattered, disorganized, and by the time they regrouped, most of the vaults had already failed. So who was Vault-Tec collecting data for? Who was supposed to benefit from all those experiments? The official answer, the one you get from terminal entries and holotapes, is that Vault-Tec was working with the government, specifically with a shadow organization that became the Enclave. The The plan was that the Enclave would survive the war, wait for the vaults to complete their experiments, and then use the data to build a colony ship and leave Earth behind. It's a cold, logical plan, the kind of long-term thinking that requires you to sacrifice millions of lives for a goal that might not pay off for centuries. But here's the problem. The colony ship was never built. There's no evidence in any Fallout game that the Enclave ever seriously pursued space colonization. They had the technology, they had the resources, and they had 200 years to make it happen, but they didn't. Instead, they focused on reclaiming America, on wiping out mutants and ghouls and anyone who didn't meet their genetic standards. That's not the behavior of people planning to leave the planet. That's the behavior of people who want to rule it. So if the Enclave wasn't planning to use the vault data for space colonization, what were they planning to use it for? One theory, and it's a dark one, is that the vaults were never about leaving Earth. They were about controlling it. Think about what the Vault experiments actually tested. Vault 11 tested obedience and social pressure. Vault 101 tested isolation and authority. Vault 112 tested virtual reality and mind control. These aren't experiments designed to help people survive in space. These are experiments designed to figure out how to manipulate and control human populations. And if that's true, if the real goal was to create a playbook for social engineering, then the Enclave succeeded. They learned exactly how to break people, how to make them obey, how to turn them against each other, and they used that knowledge to maintain power in the post-war world. There's evidence for this scattered throughout the series. In Fallout 2, you meet Enclave scientists who talk about the vaults like they're proud of them, like the experiments were a success even though most of the subjects died. They don't talk about space colonization. They talk about genetic purity and social order and the need for strong leadership. In Fallout 3, you find Enclave records that describe plans to use modified FEV, the forced evolutionary virus, to wipe out everyone in the wasteland who doesn't meet their standards. That's not preparation for leaving Earth. That's genocide. And in Fallout 4, you discover that the Institute, which has no direct connection to the Enclave, is running similar experiments on the surface, testing how people react to synth infiltration and resource scarcity. It's the same playbook, the same methods, and it suggests that the Vault experiment methodology didn't die with Vault tech. It evolved. Here's the detail that makes this theory really disturbing. In Fallout 76, which is set only 25 years after the bombs fell, you find Vault-Tec corporate records that were created after the war, not before, after. That means Vault-Tec, or at least some part of the company, survived the nuclear apocalypse and continued operating. The records describe ongoing experiments, new Vault designs, and plans to expand the program, but Vault-Tec was a private corporation, not a government agency. They didn't have bunkers or oil rigs or military protection, so how did they survive? And more importantly, who were they working for? The answer, or at least the implied answer, is that Vault-Tec was always more than a corporation. They were a front, a way for the shadow government to conduct experiments without public oversight. The people running Vault-Tec weren't businessmen. They were intelligence operatives, scientists, and social engineers who saw the nuclear war as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. And when the bombs fell, they didn't die. They went underground, not into vaults, but into something else, something deeper and more secure. And they've been watching ever since, observing how their experiments played out, taking notes, refining their methods. The vaults weren't the end of their work. They were the beginning. This theory is speculative, but it's supported by a strange detail that appears in multiple games. In several locations, you can find Vault-Tec logos and equipment in places that shouldn't have them. Military bases, corporate headquarters, government buildings, all of them have Vault-Tec terminals and Vault-Tec supplies, even though there's no vault nearby. The official explanation is that Vault-Tec had contracts with the government and sold equipment to various agencies, but if you read the terminal entries, if you look at what the equipment was being used for, you'll find that it's not standard supplies. It's monitoring equipment, psychological testing tools, and behavior modification devices. Vault-Tec wasn't just building vaults. They were building a surveillance and control network that covered the entire country, and the vaults were just the most visible part of it. Let's shift to a mystery that's more personal, more intimate, and somehow more unsettling than corporate conspiracies and government experiments. In Fallout 4, there's a radio station called the Classical Radio Station, and it plays pre-war music, orchestral pieces, and operas and symphonies. And it's one of the more relaxing stations in the game. A nice break from the constant combat and the apocalyptic scenery. But if you listen carefully, if you pay attention to the transitions between songs, you'll hear something strange. There's a voice, barely audible, speaking in the gaps between tracks. It's not the DJ. There is no DJ for the classical station. It's just music, or at least it's supposed to be. But the voice is there, and if you turn up the volume and filter out the music, you can make out words. The community has been trying to decode the classical radio voice for years, and they've made some progress. The voice is speaking English, but it's distorted, layered with static and interference. Some of the phrases that have been identified include, "Are you listening?" "They're coming," and "It's not safe." Those aren't random words. Those are warnings. And the fact that they're hidden in a classical music station, a station that most players use as background noise while they're building settlements or sorting inventory, makes them even more disturbing. It's like the game is trying to tell you something, trying to warn you, but it's doing it in a way that most people will never notice. Here's where it gets really strange. The classical radio voice only appears in certain locations. If you're in downtown Boston near the Institute, the voice is louder and more frequent. If you're out in the wilderness, far from any major faction, the voice disappears entirely. That suggests the voice isn't part of the radio broadcast. It's environmental, something that's being added to the signal based on where you are. And if that's true, then someone is monitoring your location and modifying the broadcast in real time. Someone is watching you, tracking your movements, and using the radio to communicate with you. The theories about the classical radio voice are all over the place. Some people think it's the Institute, using the radio as a way to send coded messages to their synth agents on the surface. Others believe it's the Railroad, the faction that helps synths escape from the Institute, trying to warn people about Institute surveillance. And then there are the people who think the voice is coming from somewhere else entirely, from a faction or organization that hasn't been revealed yet, something that's been operating in the shadows since before the war. That last theory is supported by a detail in the game files. The audio for the classical radio voice is labeled as pre-war warning system, which suggests it's not a post-war addition. It's something that was built into the radio network before the bombs fell, a failsafe or an emergency broadcast system that's still running 200 years later. If the classical radio voice is a pre-war system, then the question becomes, what was it designed to warn people about? The obvious answer is nuclear war, but the war already happened. The bombs already fell. So why is the system still broadcasting? Why is it still trying to warn people? One possibility is that the system is automated, that it's been running on a loop for 2 centuries, repeating the same warnings to an audience that no longer exists. But the fact that the voice changes based on your location suggests it's not automated. It's adaptive, intelligent, and that means someone or something is still operating it. There's a location in Fallout New Vegas that most players never find, and the ones who do usually wish they hadn't. It's called Vault 22, and it's one of the most unsettling places in the entire series. Vault 22 was an agricultural research facility designed to test new farming techniques and develop crops that could survive in harsh environments. The experiment seemed benign compared to most vaults, almost wholesome. But something went wrong. The scientists in Vault 22 were experimenting with a fungus, a genetically modified organism designed to accelerate plant growth. The fungus worked, but it didn't stop at plants. It started infecting the vault's residents, growing inside their bodies, taking over their nervous systems, turning them into something that was no longer human. When you explore Vault 22, you find the results of that experiment. The vault is overgrown, choked with vegetation, and filled with spore carriers, former humans who've been transformed into shambling, hostile creatures. They don't speak, don't think, just attack anything that moves. And if you go deep enough into the vault, if you make it to the lower levels, you'll find the source of the infection, a massive fungal growth that's taken over the entire area. It's still alive, still spreading, and according to the terminal entries you find, it's still intelligent. The fungus isn't just a plant, it's a hive mind, a collective consciousness made up of all the people it's infected, and it's been waiting for someone to find it. The Vault 22 Onsiksama de Buckets is one of the most horrifying things in Fallout, not because of what it does, but because of what it represents. It's a reminder that in the Fallout universe, the worst threats aren't always the ones with guns or bombs. Sometimes they're quiet, patient, and invisible until it's too late. The fungus didn't destroy Vault 22 in a day. It took years, slowly infecting people, slowly spreading through the ventilation system, slowly turning the vault into a tomb. And the people inside didn't realize what was happening until they were already infected, until it was too late to stop it. Here's the mystery that keeps people coming back to Vault 22. The fungus didn't stay in the vault. According to the terminal entries, some of the infected residents escaped before the vault was sealed. They made it to the surface, wandered into the Mojave, and died out there. But the fungus didn't die with them. It's still out there, dormant, waiting for the right conditions to spread again. And if you complete a certain quest in New Vegas, if you help the NCR with their agricultural research, you'll be asked to retrieve data from Vault 22, data about the fungus and how it works. The NCR scientist who gives you the quest talks about using the fungus to solve food shortages, to create crops that can grow anywhere. He's excited, optimistic, completely unaware of what the fungus actually does, and the game gives you a choice. You can give him the data, or you can destroy it. If you give the NCR the Vault 22 data, the game doesn't show you the immediate consequences. There's no cutscene where the fungus escapes and infects the wasteland. But in the ending slides, if you pay attention, there's a brief mention that the NCR's agricultural program experienced complications and had to be shut down. That's it. No details, no explanation, just complications. And that ambiguity is more terrifying than any explicit description could be because it leaves you wondering, did the fungus escape? Did it infect people? Is it spreading right now, slowly, quietly, turning the Mojave into another Vault 22? The game doesn't tell you, and that's the point. You made a choice, and you have to live with not knowing whether it was the right one. The Vault 22 fungus has appeared in other Fallout games, or at least similar organisms have. In Fallout 4, there are locations where you can find unusual plant growth, areas where the vegetation is thicker and more aggressive than it should be. Some players have noticed that these areas have spores in the air, the same kind of spores you find in Vault 22. Bethesda has never confirmed that these are connected, but the visual similarities are too strong to be coincidental. And if the fungus did make it to the Commonwealth, if it's been spreading slowly for decades, then the implications are staggering. Because the fungus doesn't just kill people, it absorbs them, adds them to its collective consciousness, and uses their knowledge and memories to grow smarter. A fungus that's been infecting people for 200 years would know things, would understand things, and might even be able to communicate. There's a theory, and it's one of the most unsettling in the entire Fallout community, that the fungus is already communicating. That some of the strange radio signals you hear in the games, the ones that don't correspond to any known station, are actually the fungus trying to reach out. The theory points to specific audio files in Fallout 4 that contain what sounds like breathing, slow, and rhythmic mixed with static. The files are labeled as ambient noise, background sound meant to create atmosphere, but if you isolate them, if you listen closely, you can hear patterns. The breathing speeds up and slows down in response to the player's actions, gets louder when you're near areas with heavy vegetation, and stops completely when you're in urban environments. That's not random. That's reactive. And if the fungus can react to your presence, if it can sense where you are and what you're doing, then it's not just a plant. It's watching you. The idea that the Vault 22 fungus is still active, still spreading, still evolving, is one of those theories that changes how you see the entire series. Because if it's true, then every overgrown building, every patch of unusual vegetation, every area where the plants seem just a little too healthy, might be infected. And the worst part is that you'd never know. The fungus is patient. It doesn't need to infect everyone at once. It can wait, can spread slowly, can take decades or centuries to achieve whatever goal it has. and by the time anyone realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. Let's talk about the Prydwen, the Brotherhood of Steel's airship in Fallout 4, because there's something deeply wrong with it that most players never notice. The Prydwen is massive, a pre-war aircraft carrier that the Brotherhood salvaged and converted into a flying fortress. It's an impressive piece of engineering, a symbol of the Brotherhood's power and technological superiority. But if you actually look at the Prydwen, if you examine its design and think about how it works, you'll realize that it shouldn't be able to fly. The ship is too heavy, the engines are too small, and the amount of fuel it would need to stay airborne is more than the Brotherhood could possibly have, and yet it flies, hovering over Boston for the entire game, never landing, never refueling, never showing any signs of mechanical failure. The official explanation is that the Prydwen uses a combination of pre-war technology and Brotherhood modifications, that it's powered by fusion cores and kept aloft by some kind of advanced propulsion system. But if you read the terminal entries on the ship, if you talk to the Brotherhood engineers, you'll find that they don't actually understand how it works. They know how to maintain it, how to keep the systems running, but they don't know the underlying principles. They're following instructions left by the people who built it, performing maintenance rituals that they don't fully comprehend, and that raises a question: if the Brotherhood doesn't understand the technology that keeps the Prydwen flying, how do they know it's safe? How do they know it won't fail? There's a terminal on the Prydwen, hidden in the engineering section, that contains a series of error logs. The logs describe system failures, power fluctuations, and unexplained malfunctions that happen on a regular basis. The engineers fix them, but they don't know what's causing them, and the problems keep coming back. One log mentions that the ship's altitude control system sometimes activates on its own, adjusting the Prydwen's position without any input from the crew. Another describes strange readings from the power core, energy spikes that don't correspond to any known system. And a third log, the one that's most disturbing, mentions that the ship's internal sensors sometimes detect movement in areas that should be empty, as if something is walking through the corridors when no one is there. The Prydwen mystery is compounded by its history. According to Brotherhood records, the ship was found in a pre-war military facility, already built, already functional. The Brotherhood didn't construct it. They just claimed it, repaired it, and started using it, but there's no record of the U.S. military building airships. The pre-war government had vertibirds, helicopters, and conventional aircraft, but nothing like the Prydwen. So, where did it come from? Who built it? And why was it just sitting in a hangar waiting to be found? One theory suggests that the Prydwen was built by the Enclave, that it was part of their post-war operations and the Brotherhood captured it during one of their conflicts. That would explain the advanced technology and the lack of documentation. The Enclave was always secretive, always working on projects that weren't officially recorded. But if the Prydwen is Enclave technology, then the Brotherhood is flying around in a ship that might have hidden systems, back doors, or fail-safes that they don't know about. The Enclave could have built in a way to remotely control the ship or to shut it down or to make it explode, and the Brotherhood would never know until it was too late. Another theory, darker and more speculative, suggests that the Prydwen isn't a ship at all. It's a vault, or something like a vault, a mobile experiment designed to test how people react to living in a confined space with a constant external threat. Think about it. The Brotherhood soldiers on the Prydwen are isolated from the ground, dependent on the ship for survival, and constantly aware that they're floating hundreds of feet in the air with no way down except vertibirds. That's a perfect environment for psychological testing, for seeing how people handle stress and confinement, and the knowledge that one system failure could kill everyone on board. And if the Prydwen is an experiment, then someone is collecting data. Someone is watching, and the Brotherhood is just the latest group of test subjects. The evidence for this theory is thin, but it's there. The Prydwen's design includes features that don't make sense for a military vessel. There are observation rooms with one-way mirrors, terminals that log crew behavior and psychological profiles, and a medical bay that's far more advanced than anything else the Brotherhood has. These could be explained as standard military features, but they could also be explained as monitoring equipment, tools designed to study the crew without their knowledge. And if you hack certain terminals on the ship, if you dig deep enough into the system, you'll find files labeled behavioral analysis and stress response data. The Brotherhood thinks these files are their own records, reports they're compiling about their operations. But the file structure, The way the data is organized suggests it was created by someone else, someone who's been watching the Brotherhood since before they boarded the ship. Let's move to a mystery that's been hiding in plain sight since Fallout 3, one that involves the single most important resource in the wasteland: water. Clean water is rare in the Fallout universe, and most of what's available is irradiated, toxic, or both. The main quest of Fallout 3 revolves around Project Purity, a plan to purify the water in the tidal basin and provide clean water to the entire capital wasteland. It's a noble goal, and the game treats it as the ultimate good deed, the thing that will save thousands of lives and give people hope for the future. But if you actually think about Project Purity, if you consider the logistics and the implications, you'll realize that it doesn't make sense. Project Purity is designed to purify the water in the tidal basin, which is connected to the Potomac River, which flows into the Chesapeake Bay, which connects to the Atlantic Ocean. The plan is to activate a massive purifier that will clean the water and then let it flow naturally through the river system, spreading clean water across the region. But here's the problem. The tidal basin is tidal, meaning it's connected to the ocean, and the ocean is huge. Even if Project Purity could purify every drop of water in the tidal basin, that clean water would immediately mix with the irradiated ocean water, diluting it to the point of uselessness. Within hours, maybe minutes, the tidal basin would be just as contaminated as it was before. Project Purity can't work, not the way it's described, not unless there's something else going on. The game never addresses this. The ending shows clean water flowing from the purifier, people drinking it and celebrating, and the wasteland slowly recovering. But if you talk to the scientists involved in the project, if you read the terminal entries, you'll find hints that they know the plan has problems. There are references to secondary systems and distribution networks and containment protocols, but none of these are ever explained. And if you side with the Enclave, if you let them take control of Project Purity, they reveal that the purifier can do more than just clean water. It can be used to distribute modified FEV, turning the water into a weapon that will kill anyone with radiation-induced mutations. That means Project Purity was always designed to be weaponized, that the purification function was just a cover for something darker. Here's the theory that makes the most sense. Project Purity isn't about purifying water, it's about controlling it. Whoever controls the purifier controls the water supply, and whoever controls the water supply controls the wasteland. The Brotherhood of Steel, the Enclave, even your father, the scientist who designed the project, they all understood this. The purifier is a tool of power, a way to decide who gets to drink and who doesn't, who lives and who dies. And the fact that the game frames it as a purely altruistic endeavor, as the ultimate act of heroism, is either naive or deliberately misleading. There's evidence for this in Fallout 4, where you can build water purifiers in your settlements. The purifiers produce clean water, lots of it, more than your settlers can drink. And the excess water appears in your workshop as a tradable resource, something you can sell for caps. That's not a bug. That's the game showing you how water purification actually works in the wasteland. It's not about helping people. It's about creating a commodity, something valuable that you can control and profit from. And if you can do that with a small settlement purifier, imagine what you could do with something the size of Project Purity. You could build an empire. You could rule the wasteland. And that's exactly what the Brotherhood did. The water control theory extends beyond just Project Purity. If you look at the major factions in Fallout, almost all of them have some connection to water. The NCR in New Vegas controls the Hoover Dam, which provides both power and water to the region. The Institute in Fallout 4 has advanced water purification technology that they keep to themselves. Even the raiders and smaller factions tend to set up camps near water sources, fighting over rivers and lakes and underground reservoirs. Water is the real currency of the wasteland, more valuable than caps or ammunition or even food, because you can survive for weeks without food, but only days without water. And the factions that understand this, that recognize water as the ultimate strategic resource, are the ones that survive and grow powerful. There's a location in Fallout 4 that ties into this theory in a disturbing way. It's called the Gwinnett Brewery, and it's a pre-war factory that produced beer and other beverages. When you explore the brewery, you find that it's still operational, still producing drinks 200 years after the bombs fell. The machinery is running, the bottles are being filled, and everything is automated. But here's the strange part. The brewery is using clean water, not irradiated river water, not recycled wastewater, but pure, uncontaminated water that's somehow being pumped in from an unknown source. The terminal entries in the brewery mention a primary water line that connects to a municipal supply, but there is no municipal supply anymore. The infrastructure was destroyed in the war. So where's the water coming from? If you follow the pipes, if you trace them back through the brewery and into the walls, you'll find that they lead down deep underground, far below the level of the building's foundation. The pipes disappear into the earth, and there's no way to follow them further without console commands. But players who've used those commands, who've clipped through the walls and followed the pipes to their source, have found something strange. The pipes connect to a massive underground network, a system of tunnels and reservoirs that spans the entire Commonwealth. And in several locations, the tunnels connect to Institute facilities. The Institute has been tapping into pre-war water infrastructure, using it for their own purposes, and in some cases, they've been pumping clean water to the surface, to specific locations, for reasons that are never explained. The Gwinnett Brewery mystery suggests that the Institute has been manipulating the Commonwealth's water supply for decades, possibly longer. They have the technology to purify water on a massive scale, and they have access to underground reservoirs that nobody else knows about. But instead of sharing that water, instead of using it to help the people on the surface, they're keeping it for themselves and using it as a tool of control. The brewery is still producing drinks because the Institute wants it to. Maybe they're using it as a testing ground, seeing how long pre-war machinery can run without maintenance. Or maybe they're using it as bait, attracting scavengers and raiders to a specific location so they can observe them. Either way, it's another example of the Institute treating the surface world as a laboratory and the people living there as test subjects. Let's talk about the glowing sea, the massive irradiated crater in the southwestern corner of Fallout 4's map. It's where the nuclear bomb hit, ground zero for the destruction of Boston, and it's the most hostile environment in the game. The radiation is so intense that you need power armor or a hazmat suit just to survive, and the creatures that live there, deathclaws, rad scorpions, and feral ghouls, are bigger and more aggressive than anywhere else. The glowing sea is a dead zone, a place where nothing should be able to live, and yet it's teeming with life, mutated, horrifying life, but life nonetheless. And that raises a question that the game never answers. How? Radiation doesn't create life, it destroys it. High levels of radiation damage DNA kill cells and cause cancer and organ failure. The creatures in the glowing sea shouldn't exist. They should have died within days of the bombs falling, their bodies too damaged to function, but instead they thrived. They grew larger, stronger, more resilient. And some of them, like the Deathclaws, seem to have developed new abilities, new adaptations that have nothing to do with natural evolution. Deathclaws in the glowing sea are faster and tougher than Deathclaws anywhere else, and they have a strange luminescence, a faint glow that suggests they're not just surviving the radiation, but somehow using it. The official explanation, the one you get from in-game sources, is that the creatures in the glowing sea were affected by FEV, the forced evolutionary virus that's responsible for super mutants and many other mutations in the Fallout universe. FEV accelerates evolution, causes rapid genetic changes, and can turn ordinary creatures into monsters. But FEV doesn't explain everything. The virus was created in a lab, and while it was used in various experiments across the country, there's no record of it being deployed in Boston. The Institute has FEV. They use it to create super mutants, but they keep it contained in their facility. So how did it get into the glowing sea? How did it infect every creature in the area? One theory suggests that the bomb that hit Boston wasn't a standard nuclear weapon. It was a bioweapon, a missile loaded with both nuclear material and FEV, designed to not just destroy the city, but to transform it. This theory is supported by a detail in the game's intro sequence. When you watch the bombs fall from Vault 111, you can see that the explosion over Boston is a different color than the other explosions in the distance. Most nuclear detonations in fallout produce a bright white or yellow flash, but the Boston bomb produces a greenish glow, the same color associated with FEV in other games. That could be an artistic choice, a way to make the explosion more visually distinct, but it could also be a clue. If the Boston bomb was an FEV weapon, then the question becomes who fired it? The obvious answer is China, America's enemy in the war, but that doesn't make sense. China wouldn't have had access to FEV. It was an American creation, developed by American scientists in American labs. The only people who could have deployed an FEV weapon are Americans, which means the bomb that destroyed Boston might have been fired by the U.S. government. That's a dark possibility, the idea that America bombed its own city, but it fits with what we know about the pre-war government. They were paranoid, ruthless, and willing to sacrifice anything for strategic advantage. If they believed that deploying FEV would give them an edge, would create super soldiers or test subjects or data they could use, they might have done it. And if that's true, then the Glowing Sea isn't a tragedy, it's an experiment. One that's still running 200 years later. There's a character in the Glowing Sea who adds another layer to this mystery. His name is Virgil, and he's a former Institute scientist who was working on FEV research. Virgil exposed himself to the virus, turned himself into a super mutant, and fled to the Glowing Sea to hide from the Institute. When you meet him, he's living in a cave, surrounded by radiation and hostile creatures, and he's surprisingly sane for a super mutant. He can talk, reason, and even conduct scientific research. And if you complete his quest, if you bring him a serum that will reverse his mutation, he'll tell you something interesting. He says that the FEV strain the Institute was using is different from the strains used in other parts of the country, that it's been modified, refined, and that it produces more stable results. And he mentions that the Institute didn't create this strain. They found it somewhere in the Commonwealth, already active, already spreading. Virgil's revelation suggests that FEV was in Boston before the Institute started experimenting with it, that it's been in the environment since the bombs fell, possibly longer. And if that's true, then the Institute didn't introduce FEV to the Commonwealth, they just found it and started using it. But that raises another question. If FEV was already in Boston, if it was released during the war, then who released it? And more importantly, why is it still active? FEV is a virus, and viruses need hosts to survive. After 200 years, with no new sources of infection, the virus should have died out. But it hasn't. It's still in the Glowing Sea, still mutating creatures, still spreading. And that suggests that something is keeping it alive, something is maintaining it, and that something might still be out there. Let's shift to a mystery that's more metaphysical, more existential, and somehow more unsettling than anything we've talked about so far. In Fallout 4, there's a character named Dima, a synth who lives in Far Harbor, a small island off the coast of Maine. Dima is unique among synths because he's self-aware, not just conscious, but aware of his own consciousness, aware that he's a synthetic being with artificial memories. And he's been alive for a long time, longer than any other synth, long enough that he's started to question the nature of reality itself. When you talk to Dima, he asks you a question that the game never fully answers. How do you know you're not a synth? It's a simple question, but it cuts to the heart of Fallout 4's narrative. The game is built around the idea that synths are indistinguishable from humans, that they have memories and emotions and free will, and that the only way to tell them apart is to kill them and check for a synth component. But if synths can have false memories, if they can be programmed to believe they're human, then how do you know your memories are real? How do you know you're not a synth who's been programmed to think they're the sole survivor, the person who escaped Vault 111 and is looking for their son? The game toys with this idea throughout the story. There are moments where your character's memories are questioned, where NPCs suggest that you might not be who you think you are. The Institute has the technology to create perfect replicas of people, complete with their memories and personalities. They've done it before, replacing people on the surface with synth duplicates. So why couldn't they do the same thing with you? Why couldn't the player character be a synth, programmed with the memories of the real soul survivor, sent to the surface to fulfill some purpose that the Institute hasn't revealed? The evidence for this theory is scattered throughout the game, and most of it is circumstantial, but it's there. First, there's the way you survive Vault 111. You were frozen for over 200 years, thawed out briefly to watch your spouse die, and then frozen again. That's an incredible amount of stress on the human body, and the game never explains how you survived it without any lasting damage. Most people who are frozen and thawed experience severe health problems, but you wake up perfectly fine, ready to fight and explore and survive in a hostile wasteland. That's not normal. That's not how cryogenic preservation works, at least not with pre-war technology. But it is how a synth would work, because synths don't have the same biological limitations as humans. Second, there's the way you interact with the Institute. When you finally reach them, when you meet Father and learn that he's your son, the Institute accepts you immediately. They don't question your identity, don't run tests to confirm you're who you say you are. They just assume you're the sole survivor and give you access to their most sensitive facilities. That's strange, because the Institute is paranoid about security. They don't trust anyone, not even their own scientists, so why would they trust you, unless they already know who you are, unless they created you? Third, there's a conversation you can have with Dima where he suggests that your earliest memories might not be real, that they might have been implanted. He asks you to describe your life before the war, and no matter what you say, he points out inconsistencies, details that don't quite add up. And he's right. If you pay attention to the pre-war sequence at the beginning of the game, if you really think about what you see, you'll notice that it's vague, generic, almost like a template. You have a spouse and a baby. You live in a nice house. You're preparing for an event that never happens. It's the kind of memory that could be constructed, a simple narrative designed to give you a sense of identity without requiring too much detail. The game never confirms whether you're a synth or not, and that's intentional. The ambiguity is the point. Fallout 4 is asking you to question your own identity, to wonder whether your memories and experiences are real or just programming. And the fact that you can't know for certain, that there's no way to prove you're human, is more disturbing than any explicit reveal could be. Because if you're a synth, then everything you've done, every choice you've made might have been part of someone else's plan. You're not the hero of your own story. You're a tool, a puppet, and the strings are so well hidden that you can't even see them. The player character is a synth. Theory has been debated endlessly in the Fallout community, and Bethesda has never given a definitive answer. Some developers have hinted that it's intentionally ambiguous, that they wanted players to draw their own conclusions. Others have suggested that the theory is reading too much into narrative conveniences, that the game's story requires certain things to happen and not everything needs a deep explanation. But the fact remains that the game plants the seeds of doubt, gives you just enough evidence to question everything, and then leaves you to wrestle with the implications. And maybe that's the most effective kind of horror, the kind that doesn't jump out at you, but instead quietly suggests that everything you believe might be wrong. There's another layer to this mystery that involves the Memory Den, a location in Goodneighbor where you can relive memories using pre-war technology. During the main quest, you use the Memory Den to access the memories of a synth named Kellogg, the man who killed your spouse and kidnapped your son. You literally enter his mind, see his memories as if they were your own, and experience his life from his perspective. It's a powerful sequence, one of the most memorable in the game, but it raises a question that nobody seems to be asking. If you can access Kellogg's memories, if you can experience them as if they were real, then how do you know your own memories aren't someone else's? How do you know that the life you remember, the spouse and the child and the house in the suburbs, isn't just a recording you've been playing on loop? The Memory Den technology is never fully explained. You're told it works by interfacing with your brain, accessing neural pathways, and reconstructing experiences from electrical patterns. But if the technology can read memories, it can probably write them too. And if the Institute has access to Memory Den technology, which they do because they have similar equipment in their facility, then they have the ability to implant false memories into anyone they want. They could take a blank synth, load it with a lifetime of experiences, and send it into the world believing it's human. And the synth would never know. It would have memories of childhood, of growing up, of falling in love and having a family, and all of it would be fiction, a story written by someone else. This is where the Fallout 4 narrative becomes genuinely unsettling, because it's not just asking whether you're a synth, it's asking whether it matters. If your memories feel real, if your emotions are genuine, if you make choices and experience consequences, does it matter whether you're made of flesh or circuits? The game presents synths as people, as beings with rights and agency and the capacity for suffering, and then it asks you to decide whether they deserve to be free or whether they're just property. But if you're a synth, if the player character is synthetic, then the game is also asking you to decide your own fate. Are you a person or are you a thing? And who gets to make that decision? Let's talk about a mystery that's been lurking in the background of every Fallout game but has never been directly addressed. The aliens, the Zetons. They're canon, they're real, and they've been abducting humans and conducting experiments for centuries. In Fallout 3, you can find a crashed UFO and follow a trail of alien technology to Mothership Zeta, a fully operational alien spacecraft orbiting Earth. You fight your way through the ship, meet other abductees from different time periods, and eventually take control of the vessel. It's a wild, pulpy adventure, and it's treated as a side story, a fun diversion from the main plot. But if you think about the implications, if you consider what the existence of aliens means for the Fallout universe, it changes everything. The Zetons have been observing Earth for at least 1,000 years, possibly longer. They've abducted cowboys, samurai, soldiers, and civilians, taking them aboard their ships and performing experiments that range from medical examinations to psychological torture. They have technology that's far beyond anything humans have ever created, weapons that can disintegrate matter, shields that can deflect any attack, and ships that can travel faster than light. And they've been watching humanity destroy itself, watching the nuclear war, watching the wasteland emerge, and they've done nothing to stop it. They just observed, took notes, and continued their experiments. Here's the question that should keep you up at night. Why? What are the Zetons looking for? What's the point of abducting humans and studying them for centuries? The game never explains. The aliens don't communicate, don't reveal their motives, and when you finally confront them, they're just enemies to be killed. But the fact that they're still here, still active, still conducting experiments 200 years after the bombs fell suggests that they're not done. They're waiting for something or preparing for something, and humanity is part of their plan, whether we know it or not. There's a theory, and it's one of the most far-reaching in the Fallout community, that the Zetons caused the nuclear war. Not directly, not by launching the missiles themselves, but by manipulating events, by pushing humanity towards self-destruction. The theory points to evidence scattered across multiple games. In Fallout 3, you find audio logs on Mothership Zeta that include recordings of military communications from the day the bombs fell. The aliens were listening, monitoring the situation, and according to some interpretations of the garbled audio, they might have been interfering with communications, creating confusion, making it harder for humans to prevent the war. In Fallout 4, there are references to pre-war UFO sightings, incidents where alien craft were spotted near military bases and government facilities. And in Fallout 76, you can find a crashed alien ship that's been on Earth since before the war, suggesting that the Zetons had a permanent presence on the planet, not just brief visits. If the Zetons wanted humanity to destroy itself, the question is, why? One possibility is that they're studying extinction events, trying to understand how intelligent species self-destruct so they can avoid the same fate. Another possibility is that they're clearing the planet, removing humanity so they can colonize Earth themselves. And then there's the darkest possibility, the one that fits with everything we know about the Zetons. They're not trying to destroy humanity. They're trying to evolve it. They're using the nuclear war as a catalyst, a way to accelerate mutation and adaptation, and they're watching to see what emerges. The super mutants, the ghouls, the Deathclaws, all of the creatures that have appeared in the wasteland might be exactly what the Zetons wanted. And if that's true, then the experiments aren't over. They're just entering a new phase. There's a location in Fallout 4 that supports this theory in a subtle but disturbing way. It's called the Sentinel Site, and it's a pre-war military installation built to house nuclear missiles. When you explore the site, you find that it's been abandoned since before the war, that the missiles were never launched. But if you access the terminals, if you read the logs, you'll find references to unexplained equipment failures and unauthorized access in the days leading up to the war. The soldiers stationed at the site reported seeing lights in the sky, hearing strange sounds, and finding equipment that had been tampered with. And then, on the day the bombs fell, the entire facility went dark. The missiles didn't launch, the system shut down, and everyone inside disappeared. There are no bodies, no signs of struggle, just empty rooms and silent machines. The Sentinel Site mystery is never resolved. The game doesn't tell you what happened to the soldiers or why the missiles didn't launch, but if you've played Mothership Zeta, if you've seen what the Zetans are capable of, you can connect the dots. The aliens were there, they disabled the facility, abducted the personnel, and prevented the missiles from launching. But they didn't do it to save lives. They did it to control the war, to make sure it happened in a specific way, to ensure that the destruction was total but not absolute. They wanted humanity to survive, but just barely, so they could watch what happened next. Let's talk about a mystery that's more recent, more controversial, and more confusing than almost anything else in the series. Fallout 76, the online multiplayer game set in West Virginia, introduced a concept that broke one of the fundamental rules of the Fallout universe. It showed us a world where the bombs fell, but the people survived. Not in vaults, not underground, but on the surface, in towns and settlements, living relatively normal lives for years after the war. The game takes place only 25 years after the bombs, and when you emerge from Vault 76, you find that Appalachia is still green, still alive, still recognizable as the world that existed before. There are trees, animals, rivers, and even some intact buildings. It's not the barren wasteland you see in other Fallout games. It's a world that's damaged but not destroyed. And that raises a question that the game never adequately answers. Why is Appalachia different? The official explanation is that West Virginia wasn't hit as hard as other parts of the country, that it was a rural area with few strategic targets, and that the bombs that did fall were smaller and less destructive. But that doesn't explain everything. Radiation doesn't respect geography. If the bombs fell across America, if the atmosphere was filled with radioactive fallout, then Appalachia should be just as dead as everywhere else. The trees should be gone. The animals should be mutated beyond recognition, and the water should be toxic. But it's not. The region is thriving, and some areas look almost untouched by the war. One theory suggests that Appalachia was protected by something, that there was a pre-war system in place designed to shield the region from nuclear fallout. This theory points to the Enclave presence in the area, specifically to a facility called the White Spring Bunker, which served as a command center for the Shadow government. The bunker has advanced air filtration systems, radiation shielding, and technology that's far beyond what you'd expect from a simple fallout shelter. And according to terminal entries in the bunker, the Enclave was conducting experiments with atmospheric manipulation, trying to develop ways to control weather patterns and reduce radiation levels. If they succeeded, if they deployed that technology in Appalachia, it would explain why the region survived better than anywhere else. But here's the problem with that theory. The Enclave's atmospheric technology, if it existed, would have been a game changer. It would have allowed them to reclaim the entire country, to make the wasteland habitable again. So why didn't they use it? Why did they let the rest of America remain a radioactive hellscape while Appalachia stayed green? The answer, according to some players, is that Appalachia was a test site. The Enclave used the region as a laboratory, deployed their technology on a small scale to see if it worked, and then observed the results. And what they found was that protecting an area from radiation wasn't enough. The people still died, killed by disease, starvation, and each other. Appalachia survived the bombs, but it didn't survive the aftermath, and that taught the Enclave a valuable lesson. Saving the environment isn't enough. You have to control the people, too. Fallout 76 introduces another mystery that's even more disturbing than the question of why Appalachia survived. It's the Scorched, a plague that turns people into mindless, hostile creatures covered in crystalline growths. The Scorched aren't ghouls, aren't super mutants, aren't anything that's appeared in previous Fallout games. There's something new, something that emerged in Appalachia shortly after the bombs fell, and they spread so quickly that they wiped out almost every survivor in the region. By the time you emerge from Vault 76, 25 years after the war, the Scorched Plague has killed everyone. Every town is empty, every settlement is abandoned, and the only humans left are other players, people who came from the Vault just like you. The origin of the Scorched is explained through a series of quests and terminal entries. The plague is caused by a creature called the Scorch Beast, a massive mutated bat that was created in a pre-war government experiment. The Scorch Beasts were designed as biological weapons, creatures that could spread a contagion that would turn enemy soldiers into mindless drones. But the experiment went wrong. The Scorch Beasts escaped. And when the bombs fell, they emerged from their underground lairs and began spreading the plague across Appalachia. It's a straightforward explanation, the kind of origin story that fits perfectly with Fallout's themes of pre-war hubris and unintended consequences. But if you dig deeper, if you read all the terminal entries and listen to all the holotapes, well, you'll find details that don't quite add up. First, the Scorch Beasts were created at a facility called the Abandoned Waste Dump, a site that was officially listed as a toxic waste disposal facility, but was actually a secret bioweapons lab. The experiments conducted there were classified at the highest levels, known only to a handful of government officials and military commanders. But, according to the records, the Scorch Beast project was shut down years before the war, deemed too dangerous to continue. The creatures were supposed to have been destroyed, incinerated along with all the research data. So how did they survive? How did they escape? And more importantly, who let them out? The game suggests that the Scorch Beasts escaped during the chaos of the nuclear war, that the bombs damaged their containment facilities and allowed them to break free. But the timeline doesn't support this. According to the holotapes left by survivors, the first Scorch Beast attacks happened within days of the bombs falling, far too quickly for the creatures to have escaped, multiplied, and spread across the entire region. That suggests the Scorch Beasts were already out, already active before the war even started. And if that's true, then someone released them intentionally, someone who knew what they were and what they would do. The most likely culprit is the Enclave. They had access to the abandoned waste dump. They knew about the Scorch Beast project, and they had a motive. If the Enclave wanted to test the effectiveness of the Scorched Plague, if they wanted to see how quickly it could spread and how thoroughly it could eliminate a population, Appalachia would be the perfect testing ground. It's isolated, sparsely populated, and far enough from major cities that the plague wouldn't spread beyond the region. They could release the Scorch Beasts, observe the results, and collect data without risking their own survival. And when the experiment was complete, when everyone in Appalachia was dead, they could seal the region off and move on to the next phase of their plan. This theory is supported by a detail that most players miss. In the White Spring Bunker, the Enclave's command center, there are terminals that contain reports about the Scorched Plague. The reports are dated, and if you check the dates carefully, you'll find that the first report was filed before the first recorded Scorch Beast attack. That means the Enclave knew about the plague before it started spreading, knew what it was and what it would do, and they didn't warn anyone. They just watched, took notes, and let it happen. And when the plague had run its course, when Appalachia was empty, they sent out a signal calling for Vault 76 to open, inviting a fresh batch of test subjects to enter the region and see what they would do. If that's true, if Fallout 76's entire premise is built on an Enclave experiment, then every player character is a lab rat, sent into a controlled environment to provide data for someone else's research. The game never confirms this, never gives you a quest where you confront the Enclave about their role in the Scorched Plague, but the evidence is there. And it reframes the entire game, turns it from a story about rebuilding civilization into a story about being manipulated, about being used, about being part of an experiment that you never consented to. Let's shift to a mystery that's more personal, more intimate, and somehow more tragic than government conspiracies and alien invasions. In Fallout New Vegas, there's a companion named Boone, a former NCR sniper who's haunted by his past. Boone's wife was sold into slavery and he tracked her down to a Legion camp, but by the time he found her, she'd been broken, traumatized beyond recovery. So he did the only thing he thought he could do. He shot her, killed her from a distance with a single bullet because he believed death was better than the life she was living. It's one of the darkest moments in the series, a mercy killing that Boone can't forgive himself for, and it defines his entire character. But here's the mystery. Boone's wife, Carla, was sold to the Legion by someone in Novac, the town where Boone was living. Someone betrayed her, took payment from Legion slavers, and handed her over. Boone knows this happened, but he doesn't know who did it, and he spent months trying to figure it out. When you meet him, he asks for your help, asks you to investigate and find the person responsible, and if you complete the quest, if you gather enough evidence, you'll discover that the culprit is Jeannie Mae Crawford, the owner of the Novac Motel, a friendly old woman who seems harmless and kind. She sold Carla because she was jealous, because she didn't like the way Carla looked at her, because she wanted the caps. And when you reveal the truth to Boone, he kills Jeannie Mae without hesitation, without remorse, and then he thanks you and asks to join you on your journey. The mystery isn't who sold Carla. The game gives you enough clues to figure that out. The mystery is why. Why would Jeannie Mae, a woman who's lived in Novac for years, who's respected by the community, who has no history of violence or cruelty, suddenly decide to sell someone into slavery? The game gives you a surface-level answer, jealousy and greed, but it doesn't feel complete. It doesn't explain the coldness, the calculation, the way Jeannie Mae acted like nothing happened, like she didn't just destroy 2 lives for a handful of caps. One theory suggests that Jeannie Mae was working for the Legion, that she was a spy or an informant, and that selling Carla was part of a larger operation. This theory points to the fact that Novac is strategically located, sitting on a major trade route between the NCR and New Vegas. If the Legion wanted intelligence about NCR movements, about supply lines and troop deployments, Novac would be the perfect place to have an agent. And Jeannie Mae, as the motel owner, would have access to travelers, would hear conversations, would see things that others missed. She could have been feeding information to the Legion for years, and selling Carla was just one transaction among many. But there's another theory, darker and more speculative, that suggests Jeannie Mae wasn't working for anyone. She was just a person who'd been living in the wasteland too long, who'd seen too much death and suffering, and who'd lost the ability to see other people as human. In the Fallout universe, empathy is a luxury, something that gets worn away by years of violence and scarcity. And Jeannie Mae, despite her friendly demeanor, despite her smile and her hospitality, had become hollow inside. She sold Carla not because she hated her, not because she needed the money, but because it was easy, because she could, because in the wasteland, people are just another resource, something to be traded or used or discarded when they're no longer useful. This theory is supported by a detail that's easy to miss. If you search Jeannie Mae's room after she's dead, you'll find a safe hidden behind a painting. Inside the safe are caps, lots of them, far more than she would need to run the motel. And there are also receipts, records of transactions, payments received for services rendered. The receipts don't specify what the services were, but the amounts are large, and the dates go back years. Jeannie Mae wasn't just selling Carla. She'd been selling people for a long time, quietly, carefully, and nobody noticed because she was good at hiding it. She was a predator, living in plain sight, and the wasteland gave her the perfect cover. The Jeannie Mae mystery is effective because it's not about a grand conspiracy or a supernatural threat. It's about the banality of evil, about how ordinary people can do monstrous things when the social structures that enforce morality break down. In the pre-war world, Jeannie Mae would have been arrested, tried, and imprisoned, but in the wasteland, there's no law, no justice, no consequences unless someone like Boone decides to create them. And even then, even after she's dead, the question remains, how many others are there? How many people in the Fallout universe are quietly doing terrible things, hiding behind friendly faces and getting away with it because nobody's looking? Let's talk about a mystery that's been hiding in the Fallout series since the very beginning, one that involves the nature of the wasteland itself. In every Fallout game, you encounter ghouls, humans who've been transformed by radiation into something that looks like a walking corpse. Ghouls are immune to radiation, can live for centuries, and retain their intelligence and memories at least for a while. But eventually, most ghouls go feral, losing their minds and becoming violent, mindless creatures that attack anything that moves. The process of going feral is inevitable, or at least that's what the games tell you. Every ghoul knows that one day they'll lose themselves, that they'll become the thing they fear, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. But here's the mystery. Why do some ghouls go feral and others don't? The games never give a clear answer. Some ghouls have been alive for over 200 years and are still perfectly sane. Others go feral within decades. There's no pattern, no way to predict who will turn and who won't. Some characters suggest that it's related to radiation exposure, that ghouls who absorb too much radiation lose their minds faster. Others believe it's psychological, that the ghouls who give up hope, who stop caring about their humanity, are more likely to go feral. And then there are the people who think it's random, that there's no rhyme or reason to it, that going feral is just something that happens and you can't control it. The lack of a clear explanation is frustrating, but it's also effective because it creates a sense of dread that permeates every interaction with ghouls. When you meet a sane ghoul, when you talk to them and hear their stories, you're always aware that they're on borrowed time, that they could turn at any moment, and the ghouls know it too. They talk about it, worry about it, make plans for what should happen when they finally lose themselves. Some ask their friends to kill them before they go feral. Others isolate themselves, moving to remote locations where they won't hurt anyone when they turn. It's a slow, inevitable horror, and the fact that nobody understands why it happens makes it worse. There's a theory that's gained traction in recent years, one that suggests going feral isn't a natural process, it's induced. The theory points to evidence scattered across multiple games, specifically to locations where you find large concentrations of feral ghouls. These places, subway tunnels, old buildings, abandoned neighborhoods, they all have something in common. They're filled with radiation, but not the ambient background radiation you find everywhere in the wasteland. It's concentrated, localized, coming from specific sources that seem to have been placed intentionally. Barrels of radioactive waste, leaking pipes, damaged reactors, all positioned in ways that maximize exposure to anyone living in the area. The theory suggests that someone, possibly the Enclave, possibly the Institute, possibly some other organization we haven't discovered yet, has been deliberately creating feral ghouls. They're using radiation as a weapon, targeting ghoul communities and exposing them to levels that accelerate the feralization process. The goal might be to eliminate ghouls entirely, to turn them into mindless monsters that can be killed without moral complications. Or it might be more sinister, a way to create controllable weapons, creatures that can be directed toward specific targets and then disposed of when they're no longer useful. The evidence for this theory is circumstantial, but it's there. In Fallout 4, there's a location called the Slog, a settlement run by ghouls who are trying to build a peaceful community. The Slog is surrounded by areas with unusually high radiation, and the ghouls who live there mention that they've had to deal with ferals attacking from the surrounding buildings. But if you explore those buildings, if you look at the radiation sources, you'll find that they're not natural. They're pre-war equipment that's been moved, repositioned, set up in ways that don't make sense unless someone was trying to create a radiation trap. And in one building, you'll find a terminal with a single entry, a log that describes subject placement and exposure monitoring. The log is unsigned, undated, and the rest of the terminal's data has been wiped, but the implication is clear. Someone was conducting an experiment, and the ghouls at the Slog were the test subjects. This theory extends to other locations as well. In Fallout 3, there's a ghoul community called Underworld, located in the ruins of the Museum of History. The ghouls there are sane, organized, and trying to build a society, but they're constantly under threat from ferals who attack from the surrounding tunnels. And if you explore those tunnels, if you map out the radiation sources, you'll find that they form a pattern, a ring around Underworld that's slowly tightening. It's not random, it's deliberate. Someone is trying to drive the ghouls out or turn them feral or both. The question of who's behind this, if anyone, is never answered. The games hint at possibilities but never commit to an explanation. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe the ambiguity is the point, because it forces you to confront an uncomfortable truth. In the Fallout universe, ghouls are second-class citizens, treated with suspicion and fear by almost everyone. They're denied entry to settlements, refused service in shops, and killed on sight by some factions. And if someone is deliberately turning ghouls feral, if someone is using radiation as a weapon to eliminate them, then the Wasteland's prejudice isn't just social. It's systematic, organized, and backed by resources and technology. It's genocide, conducted slowly and quietly, and nobody's stopping it because most people don't care what happens to ghouls. Let's talk about a mystery that's more metaphysical, more philosophical, and more unsettling the more you think about it. In Fallout New Vegas, there's a character named Ulysses, a former frumentarius of Caesar's Legion who's become obsessed with the idea of history, of symbols, of the stories people tell themselves about who they are and where they came from. Ulysses is the antagonist of the Lonesome Road DLC, and when you finally meet him, he tells you something that changes the way you see the entire game. He says that you destroyed a community called the Divide, that you carried a package from Navarro to the Divide, and that package contained a detonator that triggered nuclear warheads buried beneath the town. The explosion killed everyone, turned the Divide into a hellscape of radiation and storms, and Ulysses has been waiting for you ever since, waiting to make you understand what you did. The problem is, you don't remember any of this. The game never shows you delivering a package to the Divide. There's no quest, no cutscene, no dialogue that references it before Ulysses brings it up. And when he tells you what happened, when he describes the destruction you caused, your character has no response, no memory, no way to confirm or deny his story. You're just told that you did this terrible thing and you have to accept it because Ulysses says it's true. This is one of the most controversial narrative choices in the Fallout series because it retroactively assigns guilt to the player character for something that happened off-screen, something you had no control over and no knowledge of. Some players love it, think it's a brilliant way to explore themes of responsibility and unintended consequences. Others hate it, think it's unfair to blame the player for something the game never let them participate in. But regardless of how you feel about it, the Divide mystery raises a question that goes beyond the specific events of Lonesome Road. How much of your character's past is real, and how much is just a story someone else is telling? In Fallout New Vegas, you play as a courier who was shot in the head and left for dead, then rescued and brought back to life by a doctor in the town of Goodsprings. You wake up with no memory of who you are or what you were doing before you were shot, and the game lets you define your character through your choices and actions. But the game also tells you that you have a history, that you've been working as a courier for years, that you've traveled across the wasteland and delivered packages to dozens of locations. And according to Ulysses, one of those deliveries destroyed an entire community. But if you don't remember it, if there's no evidence of it except Ulysses' word, then did it really happen? Or is Ulysses lying or mistaken or projecting his own guilt onto you? The game never gives you a definitive answer. Ulysses is convinced that you're responsible for the Divide's destruction, and he has evidence, holotapes, and terminal entries that reference a courier from the Mojave Express delivering a package to the Divide. But the evidence is vague, doesn't include your name or any identifying details, and could refer to any courier. And when you confront Ulysses about this, when you point out that you don't remember any of it, he says that memory doesn't matter. What matters is the action, the consequence, the fact that the Divide is gone and someone has to be held accountable. And he's chosen you. The Divide mystery is effective because it's not really about what happened to the Divide. It's about the stories we tell ourselves, the narratives we construct to make sense of chaos. Ulysses needs you to be the person who destroyed the Divide because that gives the destruction meaning, makes it part of a larger story about symbols and history and the weight of the past. And whether you actually did it, whether you're actually guilty, is less important than the fact that Ulysses believes you are. He's created a narrative, and you're trapped in it. And the only way out is to either accept his story or reject it and face the consequences. This theme, the idea that identity is constructed through narrative rather than memory, runs through the entire Fallout series. In Fallout 3, you're told that you grew up in Vault 101, that your father was a scientist, that you had a childhood and a history. But all of that is just what you're told. You don't remember being born, don't remember your early years, and the game starts when you're already a teenager. Everything before that is just a story, a series of flashbacks and dialogue that construct your past. And if the game can construct your past, if it can tell you who you were and expect you to believe it, then how do you know any of it is true? In Fallout 4, this theme becomes even more explicit. You're told that you're a pre-war survivor, that you had a spouse and a child, that you lived in a specific house, in a specific neighborhood. But all of that happened in the first 10 minutes of the game. A brief sequence that's over before you've had time to connect with any of it. And then you're frozen for 200 years, and when you wake up, the world has changed and everyone you knew is dead. Your entire identity is based on a past that you barely experienced, a life that lasted less than an hour of gameplay, and the rest of the game is spent trying to reclaim something that might never have been real in the first place. The Fallout series is obsessed with memory, with identity, with the question of what makes you who you are. And the answer it keeps giving over and over is that you're not defined by what you remember or what you've done. You're defined by the stories people tell about you, the narratives that others construct, and the choices you make in the present. The past is always uncertain, always open to interpretation, and the only thing you can control is what you do next. And let's talk about a mystery that's been staring players in the face since Fallout 3, one that's so obvious and so strange that most people don't even think to question it. Bottle caps. In the Fallout universe, bottle caps are the standard currency, used by everyone from traders to raiders to major factions. They're valuable, they're accepted everywhere, and they're the foundation of the wasteland economy. But why? Why would people use bottle caps as money? The usual explanation is that caps are rare, difficult to counterfeit, and backed by water merchants who guarantee their value. But if you actually think about that explanation, if you consider the logistics, it falls apart. Bottle caps aren't rare. They're everywhere. Every building, every store, every home in the pre-war world had bottles, and those bottles had caps. There should be billions of them scattered across the wasteland, more than enough to cause massive inflation and render them worthless. And they're not difficult to counterfeit. Anyone with a bottle and a capping machine could produce caps, and in a world where people build functioning robots out of scrap metal, creating fake caps would be trivial. So, why do caps have value? Why does everyone accept them? The answer, according to the lore, is that the Hub, a major trading center in California, established caps as currency in the early days after the war. The water merchants in the Hub backed caps with water, promising to exchange a certain number of caps for a certain amount of clean water. This gave caps intrinsic value, turned them from trash into money, and the system spread across the wasteland as trade networks expanded. It's a reasonable explanation, and it works within the context of the first 2 Fallout games. But it doesn't explain why caps are still used 200 years later, long after the Hub's influence has waned and other currencies have emerged. In Fallout New Vegas, the NCR has its own currency, paper money backed by gold reserves. It's a more sophisticated system, more in line with how real-world economies work, and the NCR is actively trying to replace caps with their own money. But caps persist, used alongside NCR dollars, and in some areas, caps are actually more valuable. Why? If the NCR has a stable currency backed by a functioning government, why would anyone prefer caps? The answer might be trust, or rather, the lack of it. The NCR's currency is only as good as the NCR's stability, and in the Mojave, that stability is questionable. The NCR is overextended, fighting a war with Caesar's Legion, dealing with internal corruption, and struggling to maintain control over its territory. If the NCR collapses, if they lose the war or fracture into smaller states, their currency becomes worthless. But caps don't depend on any government or institution. They're decentralized, accepted by mutual agreement, and they can't be devalued by political decisions or economic policy. In a world where everything is uncertain, where factions rise and fall and nothing lasts, caps are the closest thing to a stable currency. But There's another theory, one that's darker and more conspiratorial. What if caps aren't valuable because of water merchants or mutual agreement? What if someone is controlling the supply, artificially maintaining scarcity to keep caps valuable? This theory suggests that there's an organization, possibly the Crimson Caravan, possibly the Gun Runners, possibly someone we haven't met, that's been collecting and destroying caps for decades. They gather them from the wasteland, melt them down or bury them, and keep the total number in circulation low enough that caps retain their value. And they do this because controlling the currency means controlling the economy, means having power over every transaction, every trade, every exchange of goods and services in the wasteland. The evidence for this theory is thin, mostly circumstantial observations about how the wasteland economy functions. But there are hints. In Fallout 4, if you build trading posts in your settlements, you'll notice that merchants always have caps. Always have money to buy your goods no matter how much you sell them. Where do those caps come from? Who's supplying them? The game treats it as a gameplay convenience, an infinite money source, so you can always sell your loot. But if you think about it as an in-universe phenomenon, it suggests that there's a system in place, a network, that distributes caps to merchants and ensures that trade can continue. In Fallout New Vegas, there's a quest where you investigate the Crimson Caravan, one of the largest trading companies in the wasteland. If you hack their terminals, if you read their internal communications, you'll find references to currency management and supply control. The documents are vague, written in corporate jargon, but they describe a system where the Crimson Caravan monitors the flow of caps across their trade routes and makes adjustments to maintain optimal market conditions. That could just mean they're managing their own inventory, making sure they have enough caps to conduct business. Or it could mean they're manipulating the entire economy, controlling how many caps are in circulation and using that control to maximize their profits. The bottle cap mystery is one of those things that seems trivial until you realize how fundamental it is to the entire Fallout universe. Currency is power, and whoever controls the currency controls the wasteland. If there's an organization manipulating the cap supply, if they're artificially maintaining scarcity and using that scarcity to enrich themselves, then they're more powerful than any faction, more influential than the NCR or the Brotherhood or the Institute. And they're doing it invisibly, quietly, in a way that nobody notices because everyone just accepts that caps are money and doesn't question why. Let's talk about a mystery that involves one of the most iconic images in the Fallout series, the Vault Boy, the cheerful cartoon mascot who appears on every Vault-Tec advertisement, every perk icon, every piece of promotional material. He's smiling, giving a thumbs up, and he's become the face of the franchise, instantly recognizable to anyone who's played the games. But there's something strange about Vault Boy, something that's been debated in the community for years. In many of his poses, he's holding his thumb up in front of his face as if he's measuring something. And according to a popular theory, he's not just posing, he's demonstrating a technique for measuring the size of a nuclear explosion. The theory goes like this: if you're caught outside during a nuclear blast, you can use your thumb to estimate how far away you are from the explosion. You hold your arm out straight, close one eye, and if the mushroom cloud is smaller than your thumb, you're far enough away that you might survive. If it's bigger than your thumb, you're too close and you need to find shelter immediately. It's a real technique, something that was taught during the Cold War, and the theory suggests that Vault Boy is demonstrating it, that his cheerful thumbs up is actually a grim reminder of nuclear annihilation. It's a compelling theory, dark and ironic in a way that fits perfectly with Fallout's tone. But Bethesda has never confirmed it, and some developers have suggested that it's not true, that Vault Boy's thumbs up is just a thumbs up, a symbol of optimism and can-do spirit. But the ambiguity is intentional. Vault-Tec's entire aesthetic is built on this kind of cognitive dissonance, on taking the cheerful, optimistic imagery of 1950s America and using it to sell products that are designed for the end of the world. Vault Boy is smiling because that's what he's supposed to do, because maintaining the illusion of safety and normalcy is more important than acknowledging the horror of what's actually happening. There's another layer to the Vault Boy mystery that's even more disturbing. In the Fallout games, Vault Boy appears on perk icons, little images that represent the special abilities your character can learn. And some of those icons are deeply unsettling. There's one where Vault Boy is standing over a corpse, smiling. Another where he's holding a bloody knife. A third where he's aiming a gun at someone who's begging for mercy. These aren't just cartoon images, they're instructions, visual guides that teach you how to be more effective at killing, at stealing, at manipulating people. And Vault Boy is there for all of it, smiling, encouraging, making violence look fun and consequence-free. The perk icons are a perfect example of how Fallout uses its aesthetic to create discomfort. The game is asking you to do terrible things, to kill people, to steal from them, to lie and cheat and betray, and it's wrapping those actions in cheerful, colorful imagery that makes them seem harmless. Vault Boy is a mascot for atrocity, a friendly face that normalizes horror, and the fact that he's so iconic, so beloved by fans is part of the point. We've accepted him, embraced him, turned him into merchandise and memes, and in doing so, we've accepted the worldview he represents. That violence is inevitable, that survival requires cruelty, and that the best way to cope with the apocalypse is to smile and give a thumbs up. Let's talk about a mystery that's more recent, more controversial, and more confusing than almost anything else we've discussed. In Fallout 4, there's a faction called the Railroad, a group dedicated to freeing synths from the Institute and helping them escape to new lives. The Railroad operates in secret, uses codes and dead drops and safe houses, and they're constantly under threat from the Institute and the Brotherhood, both of whom want to destroy them. The Railroad's headquarters is hidden in the Old North Church, accessible through a secret passage that requires a password. And when you first meet them, when you're brought into their inner circle, they give you a mission. They want you to infiltrate the Institute, gather intelligence, and help them rescue synths from the inside. It's a straightforward setup, a classic resistance movement fighting against an oppressive regime. But there's something strange about the Railroad, something that doesn't quite add up. They claim to have been operating for decades, helping synths escape since the Institute first started creating them. But if you explore the Commonwealth, if you talk to NPCs and read terminal entries, you'll find very few references to the Railroad. Most people have never heard of them, and the ones who have think they're a myth, a story that synths tell each other to give themselves hope. For an organization that's supposedly been active for decades, the Railroad has left almost no trace. And then there's the question of how they operate. The Railroad has safe houses scattered across the Commonwealth, locations where synths can hide while they're being relocated. But these safe houses are in dangerous areas, surrounded by raiders and super mutants and feral ghouls. How do synths, who are often confused and traumatized after escaping the Institute, manage to reach these locations without being killed? How does the Railroad communicate with them, guide them, protect them? The game never explains, and the more you think about it, the less sense it makes. One theory suggests that the Railroad isn't what it appears to be, that it's not a genuine resistance movement, but a controlled opposition, an organization created by the Institute to identify and track synths who try to escape. The theory points to several suspicious details. First, the Railroad's leader, Desdemona, is paranoid about security, constantly worried about infiltration, but she accepts you into the organization almost immediately with minimal vetting. Second, the Railroad's operations are surprisingly ineffective. They claim to have freed hundreds of synths, but you never meet any of them, never see evidence of their success. And third, the Railroad's safe houses are all in locations that would be easy for the Institute to monitor, places where synths would be isolated and vulnerable. If the Railroad is a front, if it's being run by the Institute, then every synth who tries to escape, every person who helps them is walking into a trap. The Institute lets them think they're free, lets them believe they've escaped, and then tracks them, studies them, uses them to gather data about how synths behave when they think they're autonomous. It's the ultimate experiment, a way to test whether synths can truly develop free will or whether they're just following programming that makes them think they're free. The evidence for this theory is circumstantial, but it's there, in the Institute. If you access certain terminals, You'll find files labeled Railroad Operations that contain detailed information about the railroad's activities, their safe houses, their members, even their passwords. The Institute knows everything about the railroad, and they're not doing anything to stop them. That could mean the Institute is incompetent, that they're aware of the railroad but don't see them as a threat. Or it could mean the Institute is running the railroad, using them as a tool, and the entire resistance movement is just another experiment. The railroad mystery is frustrating because the game never gives you a way to investigate it, never lets you question whether the organization you're working for is legitimate. You're just expected to accept that the railroad is good, that they're helping synths, and that their cause is just. But if you pay attention, if you notice the inconsistencies and the gaps in their story, you start to wonder. And once you start wondering, once you start questioning the narrative, you can't stop. Because if the railroad is a lie, if it's a trap, then what does that say about every other faction in the game? How many of them are what they claim to be? And how many are just playing roles in someone else's experiment? The railroad theory extends even further when you consider the synth recall codes. In Fallout 4, every synth has a shutdown code, a specific sequence of words that, when spoken, causes the synth to immediately deactivate. These codes are known only to the Institute, programmed into every synth as a failsafe in case they malfunction or go rogue. But here's the problem. The railroad claims to help synths escape, to give them new identities and new lives, but they never remove the recall codes. They can't. The codes are hardwired into the synth's programming, buried so deep that even the railroad's best technicians can't access them without destroying the synth's personality in the process. This means that every synth the railroad frees is still under the Institute's control. At any moment, an Institute agent could speak the recall code, and the synth would shut down. Helpless. Ready to be retrieved. The railroad knows this. They acknowledge it in their dialogue, admit that they can't truly free synths, that the best they can do is give them a chance at a normal life and hope the Institute never finds them. But if the Institute knows where all the railroad's safe houses are, if they have detailed files on every operation, then they also know where every escaped synth is. They could retrieve them at any time, so why don't they? The answer, according to the controlled opposition theory, is that the Institute doesn't want to retrieve them. They want to see what happens when synths believe they're free, want to study how they develop, how they form relationships, how they integrate into human society. Every escaped synth is a long-term experiment, a test subject living in the wild, and the railroad is the mechanism that makes it possible. They provide the illusion of freedom, the support structure that allows synths to survive on the surface, and the Institute just watches, collects data, and waits to see what happens. There's a quest in Fallout 4 that supports this theory in a subtle but disturbing way. It's called Memory Interrupted, and it involves a synth named H222 who's been living on the surface for years, believing he's human. The railroad gave him a new identity, new memories, and a new life, and he has no idea he's synthetic. But then something goes wrong. He starts having dreams, fragments of memories that don't fit his implanted past, and he becomes convinced that something is wrong with him. When you investigate, when you dig into his history, you discover that the Institute has been monitoring him the entire time, watching his psychological development, documenting his breakdown. And when you confront the Institute about it, they're not surprised. They knew H222 was having problems. They were expecting it. It was part of the experiment. The H222 quest is presented as an isolated incident, a single synth who slipped through the cracks. But it raises the possibility that every railroad rescue is like this, that every synth they help is still being monitored, still being studied, still part of the Institute's research. And if that's true, then the railroad isn't saving anyone. They're just moving test subjects from one lab to another, from the sterile white halls of the Institute to the open-air laboratory of the Commonwealth. Let's shift to a mystery that's more cosmic, more existential, and more terrifying the more you think about it. In Fallout 3, there's a location called the Dunwich Building, a pre-war office building that's been taken over by feral ghouls and something else. Something that doesn't fit with anything else in the game. When you explore the building, when you descend into its lower levels, you start experiencing hallucinations. The walls bleed, voices whisper in languages you don't understand, and you see visions of rituals, of sacrifices. of people worshipping something ancient and terrible. At the bottom of the building, in a chamber filled with radiation and strange symbols, you find an obelisk, a stone monument covered in carvings that predate human civilization. The Dunwich Building is one of the most unsettling locations in the entire Fallout series, and it's never fully explained. The game hints that it's connected to Lovecraftian entities, to the great old ones that exist outside normal reality, but it never commits to that explanation. You're just left with the sense that something is wrong, that there's a presence in the building that shouldn't exist, and that by exploring it, you've drawn its attention. In Fallout 4, the Dunwich mystery continues. There's a location called Dunwich Borers, a pre-war quarry that was used for mining operations. When you explore the quarry, when you descend into the flooded tunnels beneath it, you find the same symbols, the same carvings, the same sense of wrongness. And at the bottom, in a chamber that's been sealed for centuries, you find another artifact, a knife called Kremv's Tooth, a weapon that's clearly not human in origin. The knife is ancient, older than the quarry, older than America, possibly older than human civilization itself. And when you pick it up, when you claim it as your own, you hear a voice, a whisper that speaks directly into your mind, promising power and demanding sacrifice. The Dunwich location suggests that there's something in the Fallout universe that predates the nuclear war. That predates humanity, something that's been waiting beneath the earth for thousands of years. The pre-war corporations, companies like Dunwich Borers LLC, discovered these artifacts, these remnants of a civilization that shouldn't exist, and they tried to use them, tried to harness their power, but they didn't understand what they were dealing with, didn't realize that some things are better left buried. The Lovecraftian elements in Fallout are controversial because they don't fit with the series' established lore. Fallout is supposed to be science fiction, a world shaped by nuclear war and human hubris, not cosmic horror and ancient gods. But the Dunwich locations are their canon, and they suggest that the Fallout universe is stranger and more dangerous than anyone realizes. The nuclear war, the vaults, the mutations, all of it might be surface-level concerns, distractions from something much older and much worse that's been lurking in the background the entire time. There's a theory that connects the Dunwich mystery to the Cabot family, the immortal family in Fallout 4 who derive their longevity from an ancient artifact. The Cabots found a city beneath the Arabian desert, a city built by a pre-human civilization, and they brought back a crown, a helmet that grants incredible powers but also drives its wearer insane. The crown is connected to the same symbols, the same carvings, the same presence that you find in the Dunwich locations. And according to Lorenzo Cabot, the family patriarch who's been wearing the crown for centuries, the artifact is a key, a way to access knowledge and power that humanity was never meant to have. If the Dunwich artifacts and the Cabot crown are connected, if they're both remnants of the same ancient civilization, then the question becomes, what was that civilization and what happened to it? The game never tells you, but the implications are clear. There was something here before humans, something powerful and alien, and it left behind artifacts that can grant immortality, drive people insane, and whisper promises of power to anyone who finds them. And those artifacts are still active, still influencing the world, still waiting for someone to use them. The Dunwich mystery is effective because it's never resolved, never explained, never given a neat conclusion. You can explore the locations, collect the artifacts, experience the hallucinations, but you never learn what it all means. You're just left with questions, with the sense that you've glimpsed something vast and incomprehensible, something that exists outside the normal rules of the Fallout universe, and that uncertainty, that lack of closure, is more frightening than any explicit revelation could be. Let's talk about a mystery that's been hiding in plain sight since Fallout 3, one that involves the Brotherhood of Steel and their true purpose in the Capital Wasteland. The Brotherhood claims they're in Washington, D.C. to recover pre-war technology, to prevent dangerous weapons from falling into the wrong hands, and to help rebuild civilization. Elder Lyons, the leader of the Capital Wasteland chapter, has even broken with Brotherhood tradition, choosing to protect the people of the wasteland rather than just hoarding technology. It's a noble mission, a departure from the Brotherhood's usual isolationism, and it's presented as a positive development, a sign that the Brotherhood is evolving. But if you pay attention, if you look at what the Brotherhood is actually doing, you'll notice something strange. They're not just recovering technology. They're searching for something specific, something they won't talk about, something that's important enough that they've committed their entire chapter to finding it. Elder Lyons mentions it in passing, refers to it as the real reason they came to D.C. But he never elaborates, and when you press him, when you ask for details, he changes the subject, says it's classified, says you don't need to know. The most obvious answer is that the Brotherhood is searching for Liberty Prime, the giant robot they eventually used to assault the Enclave's base. But Liberty Prime was found years before the events of Fallout 3, and the Brotherhood has been in D.C. for decades. So what were they looking for before they found the robot? What brought them to the Capital Wasteland in the first place? One theory suggests that the Brotherhood was searching for the Pentagon not because of Liberty Prime, but because of something else, something buried deeper in the facility. The Pentagon was the headquarters of the U.S. military, the nerve center for all of America's defense operations, and it would have contained classified information about every weapons program, every secret project, every experiment the government was conducting. If the Brotherhood could access that information, if they could recover those files, they would have a complete picture of pre-war technology, a roadmap to every hidden facility and forgotten laboratory in the country. But there's a darker possibility. What if the Brotherhood wasn't searching for technology at all? What if they were searching for people, specifically for the Enclave? The Brotherhood and the Enclave have been enemies since the events of Fallout 2, and the Brotherhood knows that the Enclave survived, that they have bases scattered across the country, and that they're planning something. If the Brotherhood came to DC because they knew the Enclave was there, if they've been hunting them for decades, then their entire mission is a lie. They're not in the Capital Wasteland to help people or recover technology. They're there to fight a war, and everything else, Project Purity, Liberty Prime, the protection of local settlements, is just a cover story. This theory is supported by the Brotherhood's behavior throughout Fallout 3. They're secretive, paranoid, and unwilling to share information even with their own members. They have soldiers stationed at strategic locations across the wasteland not to protect people, but to monitor them, to watch for Enclave activity. And when the Enclave finally reveals themselves, when they take over Project Purity and start deploying vertibirds across the region, the Brotherhood responds immediately with a level of coordination and preparation that suggests they were expecting it. They weren't surprised by the Enclave's arrival, they were waiting for it. The Brotherhood's true mission becomes even more suspicious when you consider the Outcasts, the Splinter faction that broke away from Elder Lyons because they disagreed with his decision to help the local population. The Outcasts claim they're following the original Brotherhood doctrine, that they're focused on recovering technology rather than wasting resources on wastelanders. But if you talk to the Outcasts, if you listen to what they're actually saying, you'll notice that they're not just collecting technology randomly. They're searching for specific items, specific types of pre-war equipment, and they're willing to trade valuable resources for it. They have a list, a catalog of items they need, and they're working through it systematically. The question is, who gave them that list? The Outcasts broke away from Elder Lyons, but they're still following orders, still working toward a goal that someone else defined. And if you complete their quest line, if you help them break into a pre-war military facility called VSS, you'll discover what they're really after. The facility contains a simulation system, a virtual reality training program that was used to prepare soldiers for combat. But it's not just a training tool, it's a database, a repository of military knowledge that includes tactical information, weapon specifications, and classified operational data. The Outcasts want that data, need it desperately, and they're willing to risk everything to get it. But here's the strange part. When you help the Outcasts recover the data, when you complete the simulation and extract the information, they don't keep it. They transmit it, send it somewhere else to someone who's not in the Capital Wasteland. The game doesn't tell you where the data goes or who receives it, but the implication is clear. The outcasts aren't working alone. They're part of a larger operation, taking orders from someone in the Brotherhood's main organization, and everything they're doing in DC is part of a plan that extends far beyond the capital wasteland. This connects back to the theory about Elder Lyons and the real reason the Brotherhood came to DC. If both Lyons and the outcasts are working toward the same goal, if they're both following orders from the same source, then their split might not be genuine. It might be a strategy, a way to cover more ground and pursue multiple objectives simultaneously. Lyons focuses on the Enclave, on Project Purity, on maintaining a public presence and building relationships with the local population. The Outcasts focus on technology recovery, on gathering data and resources without worrying about public opinion, and both groups report back to the same leadership, coordinate their efforts, and work toward a common goal that neither of them will talk about. The evidence for this theory is thin, mostly based on implications and unanswered questions, but it fits with what we know about the Brotherhood. They're secretive, hierarchical, and obsessed with control. They don't do anything without a reason, and they don't commit resources to a region unless there's something valuable there. The capital wasteland is a ruin, a radioactive hellscape with limited resources and a hostile population. There's no strategic reason for the Brotherhood to be there unless they're after something specific, something important enough to justify decades of occupation and the loss of countless soldiers. Let's talk about a mystery that involves one of the most disturbing locations in Fallout 4, a place that most players stumble across without realizing how significant it is. It's called Pickman Gallery, and it's the home of a serial killer named Pickman who murders raiders and arranges their bodies as art installations. When you explore the gallery, when you walk through rooms filled with corpses posed in grotesque tableaus, you're confronted with a question that the game never fully addresses. Is Pickman insane, or is he making a point? Pickman leaves notes throughout the gallery, messages that explain his philosophy. He believes that raiders are monsters, that they've abandoned their humanity and become something less than human, and that killing them is not murder, but pest control. He sees himself as an artist, someone who's transforming ugliness into beauty, taking the violence of the wasteland and giving it meaning through his work. And when you finally meet him, when you confront him in the tunnels beneath the gallery, he's not hostile. He's grateful, thanks you for clearing out the raiders who were trying to kill him, and he gives you a key to his safe as a reward. The game treats Pickman as a villain, a crazy person who's gone too far, but if you think about what he's actually doing, if you consider the context, it becomes less clear. Raiders in Fallout are not sympathetic characters. They're murderers, rapists, slavers, people who survive by preying on the weak. The game encourages you to kill them, rewards you for it, and never questions whether you're justified. So why is Pickman different? Why is he a monster for killing raiders when you do the same thing every time you play? The answer might be presentation. Pickman doesn't just kill raiders, he displays them, turns them into art, forces people to confront the violence rather than just accepting it as background noise. And that makes people uncomfortable, makes them question what they're seeing, makes them wonder whether the violence in the wasteland is normal or whether it's something that should be resisted. Pickman Gallery is a mirror, a reflection of the player's own actions. And the reason it's disturbing is because it shows you what you've been doing all along, just presented in a way that you can't ignore. There's a theory that Pickman isn't insane at all, that he's one of the sanest people in the Commonwealth. He's recognized that the wasteland is a place where violence is inevitable, where survival requires killing, and he's chosen to embrace that reality rather than pretend it's something else. He's not hiding behind justifications, not claiming he's a hero or a protector. He's just doing what needs to be done and being honest about it. And the fact that he's turned it into art, that he's found a way to create meaning from horror, might be the only rational response to a world that's fundamentally irrational. But there's another layer to the Pickman mystery, one that's easy to miss. If you explore the tunnels beneath the gallery, if you follow them to their end, you'll find that they connect to the Boston sewer system, a vast network of passages that runs beneath the entire city. And in those sewers, you'll find evidence of other people, other groups who've been using the tunnels for their own purposes. There are signs of Institute activity, synth components, and energy weapons scattered in hidden chambers. There are railroad dead drops, secret caches where agents leave messages and supplies, and there are bodies, lots of them, people who died in the tunnels and were never found. The sewers suggest that there's an entire hidden world beneath Boston, a network of tunnels and chambers where factions operate in secret, where people disappear and are never seen again. And Pickman, with his gallery and his art and his murders, might be part of that world. He might not be working alone, might be connected to something larger, something that uses the sewers to move through the city undetected. The game never explores this possibility, never gives you a quest that investigates the sewers or reveals what's really happening down there. But the evidence is there, scattered across multiple locations, waiting for someone to piece it together. Let's talk about a mystery that's been bothering players since Fallout 4 was released, one that involves the Institute and their ultimate goal. The Institute claims they're working to rebuild civilization, to advance science and technology, to create a better future for humanity. But if you pay attention to what they're actually doing, if you look at their projects and their priorities, you'll notice that none of it makes sense. They're not helping the surface, not sharing their technology, not doing anything that would actually rebuild civilization. Instead, they're conducting experiments, replacing people with synths and maintaining a state of chaos that keeps the Commonwealth weak and divided. The question is why? What's the Institute's endgame? What are they building toward? The game never gives you a clear answer, and Father, the Institute's leader, speaks in vague platitudes about humanity's future and the next stage of evolution without ever explaining what that means, and when you press him, when you ask for specifics, he deflects, says you'll understand in time, says you need to trust him. But trust requires transparency, and the Institute is anything but transparent. One theory suggests that the Institute isn't trying to rebuild civilization at all. They're trying to replace it. They're creating synths, perfecting the technology, making them indistinguishable from humans, and eventually, they plan to replace the entire human population with synthetic beings. Not through force, not through invasion, but through gradual substitution. They replace key individuals, people in positions of power or influence, and those synths then work to advance the Institute's agenda. Over time, over generations, more and more humans are replaced, until eventually there are no humans left. Just synths, all of them loyal to the Institute, all of them following the same programming. This theory is supported by several details in the game. First, the Institute has already replaced dozens of people on the surface, and they're continuing to do so. Second, they're constantly improving their synth technology, making each generation more advanced, more human, more capable of independent thought. And third, they're not concerned with the surface population's survival. They let people starve, let them kill each other, let the Commonwealth descend into chaos because they don't need those people. They're just obstacles, problems to be managed until they can be replaced. The replacement theory is terrifying because it's subtle, because it doesn't require armies or weapons or open conflict. It just requires patience, resources, and a willingness to play the long game. And the Institute has all three. They've been operating for over a century. They have technology that's decades ahead of anyone else. And they're completely isolated from the surface, safe in their underground facility where no one can touch them. They can afford to wait, to work slowly, to replace humanity one person at a time until the job is done. And if that's their plan, if that's what they're building toward, then every faction in Fallout 4 is fighting the wrong war. The Brotherhood is worried about synths as weapons, the Railroad is trying to free synths as individuals, and the Minutemen are just trying to protect settlements from immediate threats. But none of them see the bigger picture. None of them realize that the Institute isn't just creating synths. They're creating a new species, a replacement for humanity, and by the time anyone figures it out, it might already be too late. The Institute's replacement plan becomes even more sinister when you consider the Synth Retention Bureau, a division within the Institute that's responsible for tracking down escaped synths and bringing them back. On the surface, this seems like a simple security measure, a way to prevent valuable assets from being lost. But if you access the Retention Bureau's terminals, if you read their reports, you'll find something disturbing. They're not just tracking synths who escaped recently. They're tracking synths who've been on the surface for years, even decades. Synths who've built entire lives, who've married, had families, become integrated into communities. And the Institute knows where all of them are. They have files, dossiers, complete records of every escaped synth's location and activities, but they're not retrieving them. They're just watching, monitoring, collecting data on how synths behave when they believe they're free, how they form relationships, how they adapt to human society. Every escaped synth is a long-term study, an experiment in social integration, and the Institute is in no hurry to end those experiments. They'll let synths live on the surface for years, let them think they've escaped, and then, when they've gathered enough data, they'll activate the recall code or send a courser to retrieve them, or they won't. They'll just let the synth live out its life, die naturally or violently, and then move on to the next subject. This suggests that the Institute's timeline is much longer than anyone realizes. They're not planning to replace humanity in years or even decades. They're planning to do it over centuries, slowly and methodically, gathering data from each generation of synths and using that data to improve the next generation. And they can afford to take their time because they're effectively immortal. The Institute's scientists use cybernetic enhancements and advanced medical technology to extend their lifespans far beyond normal human limits. Father himself is over 60 years old, but looks and functions like someone in their 40s. And there are hints, terminal entries, and dialogue snippets that suggest some Institute scientists have been alive for over a century, their bodies maintained through technology that the surface world doesn't even know exists. If the Institute's leadership is effectively immortal, if they can live for centuries while the surface population lives and dies in a single generation, then they have an insurmountable advantage. They can plan across timescales that no other faction can match, can wait out any opposition, can afford to make mistakes and learn from them because they'll still be around to implement the corrections. The Brotherhood will eventually die out, their members aging and being replaced by new recruits who don't remember why they came to the Commonwealth. The Railroad will be infiltrated and destroyed, or they'll simply fade away as their members give up or are killed. The Minutemen will rise and fall as they always have, unable to maintain cohesion across generations. But the Institute will remain, constant and patient, working toward a goal that won't be achieved in any living person's lifetime. Let's talk about a mystery that connects to something we discussed earlier, something that ties together multiple threads in a way that's deeply unsettling. Remember the glowing sea, the massive irradiated crater where the bomb hit Boston? Remember the theory that it might have been an FEV weapon, a bioweapon designed to transform rather than just destroy? There's evidence in Fallout 4 that supports this theory, evidence that suggests the Institute knows exactly what happened in the glowing sea and has been using it for their own purposes. In the Institute, there's a division called the Bioscience Department, and they're responsible for all of the Institute's genetic research, including the FEV experiments that created the Commonwealth's super mutants. If you access their terminals, if you read their research logs, you'll find references to sample collection and field studies in the glowing sea. The scientists are sending synths into the crater, into the most hostile environment in the Commonwealth to collect specimens to study the mutations, to analyze how the radiation and the FEV are interacting, and they've been doing this for decades, long before you arrived, long before the main events of the game. The question is why? What are they looking for in the glowing sea? The official explanation, the one you get from the scientists if you ask them, is that they're studying mutation, trying to understand how radiation affects living tissue so they can develop better treatments and protections. But that doesn't explain why they need samples from the glowing sea specifically, why they're risking valuable synths to collect creatures that are available in less dangerous locations. Unless there's something in the glowing sea that exists nowhere else, something unique to that environment, something that's worth the risk. One possibility is that the Institute is studying the FEV strain that was released in the glowing sea, trying to understand how it works, how it's different from other strains, and how they can use it. If the bomb that hit Boston was an FEV weapon, if it was designed to accelerate mutation and create new forms of life, then the glowing sea is a treasure trove of genetic data, a living laboratory where evolution is happening at an accelerated rate. And the Institute, with their advanced technology and their lack of ethical constraints, would be perfectly positioned to exploit that data, to use it to improve their own FEV research, to create better synths or super mutants or something else entirely. But there's a darker possibility. What if the Institute isn't just studying the glowing sea? What if they created it? What if the Institute, or the organization that became the Institute, was responsible for the FEV weapon that hit Boston? This theory is speculative, based more on circumstantial evidence than concrete proof, but it fits with what we know about the Institute's history. The Institute was originally the Commonwealth Institute of Technology, a pre-war university that was conducting advanced research in robotics, genetics, and artificial intelligence. They had government contracts, military funding, and access to classified projects. And they survived the war intact. Their underground facilities shielded from the blast, their research preserved. If CIT was involved in FEV research before the war, if they were developing bioweapons for the military, then they would have had access to the virus, would have known how to weaponize it, and would have had the means to deploy it. And if they knew the bombs were coming, if they had advance warning like Mr. House did, they might have seen an opportunity. They could deploy their own weapon, disguise it as part of the nuclear exchange, and then study the results from the safety of their underground facility. The entire glowing sea could be their experiment, a controlled test of FEV's effects on a large-scale population. And everything that's happened since, the mutations, the creatures, the 200 years of data, has been exactly what they wanted. This theory would explain why the Institute is so interested in the glowing sea, why they've been collecting samples for decades, and why they're so secretive about their FEV research. It would also explain why they're not trying to help the surface, why they're content to let the Commonwealth remain a wasteland. Because the wasteland is the experiment. The chaos, the violence, the struggle for survival, all of it is generating data, providing the Institute with information they can use to refine their technology and advance their goals. And the people on the surface, the settlers and raiders and scavengers, they're not citizens or neighbors or fellow humans. They're test subjects, variables in an experiment that's been running for 2 centuries and shows no signs of stopping. Let's talk about one final mystery. One that's been present in every Fallout game but has never been directly addressed. It's the question of who's really in control, who's pulling the strings, who's orchestrating the events that shape the wasteland. In every game, you encounter factions that claim to have power, that present themselves as the dominant force in their region. But if you look closely, if you pay attention to the details, you'll notice that these factions are often reacting to events rather than controlling them, responding to crises that seem to emerge from nowhere, fighting enemies that appear without warning. In Fallout 3, the Enclave suddenly arrives in the capital wasteland with an army, advanced technology, and a plan to take over Project Purity. But where were they before? How did they rebuild after their defeat in Fallout 2? Who funded them, supplied them, gave them the resources to construct a mobile base and deploy vertibirds across the region? In Fallout New Vegas, Mr. House has been planning for 200 years, preparing for the moment when he can reclaim New Vegas and rebuild civilization. But his plan depends on the courier, on you, a random person who happened to get shot in the head and survived. What if you hadn't survived? What if you died in that grave? House's entire plan would have collapsed unless he knew you would survive, unless he arranged for you to survive, unless the whole thing, the platinum chip, the shooting, your resurrection, was orchestrated from the beginning. In Fallout 4, every faction is pursuing goals that seem to conflict, but if you step back, if you look at the bigger picture, you'll notice that they're all pushing in the same direction. The Brotherhood wants to destroy the Institute. The Railroad wants to free synths from the Institute. The Institute wants to maintain control over the Commonwealth. And the Minutemen want to protect settlements from all of the above. But all of these conflicts, all of this violence and chaos serves a purpose. It keeps the Commonwealth unstable, prevents any single faction from gaining too much power, and ensures that the region remains a testing ground, a place where experiments can continue without interference. The question is, who benefits from this chaos? Who profits from keeping the wasteland divided and weak? The answer might be the same organization that's been lurking in the background of every Fallout game. The same shadow government that built the vaults, that conducted the experiments, that survived the war, and has been manipulating events ever since. The Enclave, or what's left of them, or what they've become. The Enclave might not exist as a unified organization anymore. OE might have fractured into smaller groups, cells operating independently but working toward the same ultimate goal. And that goal, the one they've been pursuing since before the bombs fell, is control. Total, absolute control over what remains of humanity, over the wasteland, over the future. And they're achieving it not through conquest, but through manipulation, through creating conflicts and crises that force people to turn to authority, to accept restrictions on their freedom in exchange for security, to gradually surrender their autonomy until there's nothing left. This is the ultimate Fallout mystery. The one that connects everything, the one that suggests the entire series is telling a single story about power and control and the ways that institutions perpetuate themselves across centuries. And the most disturbing part is that you, the player, might be part of it. Every quest you complete, every faction you help, every choice you make might be advancing someone else's agenda, fulfilling a role in a plan you don't understand and can't escape. You think you're the hero, the protagonist, the person who's going to save the wasteland, but maybe you're just another test subject, another variable in an experiment that's been running since before you were born and will continue long after you're gone. The idea that the player is just another test subject, another piece in someone else's game, is reinforced by a detail that appears in multiple Fallout games but is never explained. The Pip-Boy. This device, the wrist-mounted computer that every Vault Dweller receives, is presented as a helpful tool, something that tracks your health, manages your inventory, and helps you navigate the wasteland. But if you think about what it actually does, if you consider its capabilities, you'll realize it's not just a tool. It's a monitoring device, a tracking system, and possibly a control mechanism. The Pip-Boy records everything. Every location you visit, every person you meet, every item you pick up, every quest you complete. It tracks your vital signs, your radiation levels, your injuries, your psychological state. It has access to radio frequencies, can receive and transmit signals, and in some models, it can interface directly with your nervous system, affecting your perception and even your decision-making. And all of this data, all of these records, are being stored somewhere. The Pip-Boy has memory, has processing power, and according to terminal entries in various games, it can transmit data wirelessly to other devices. So who's receiving that data? Who's monitoring you? The obvious answer is Vault-Tec, the company that manufactured the Pip-Boys and distributed them to Vault Dwellers. But Vault-Tec was destroyed in the war, their headquarters bombed, their executives dead or scattered. Except we know that's not entirely true. Vault-Tec had contingency plans, had facilities that survived, had personnel who made it to safety, and in Fallout 76, you discover that Vault-Tec's leadership, their top executives and scientists, retreated to a secret vault, Vault 63, where they planned to wait out the apocalypse and then emerge to rebuild according to their vision. If Vault-Tec's leadership survived, if they're still out there somewhere, then they might still have access to the Pip-Boy network, might still be receiving data from every Vault Dweller who's wearing one, and that means they know everything about you. They know where you've been, what you've done, who you've killed, what choices you've made. They've been watching you since the moment you left the vault, tracking your progress, analyzing your behavior, and possibly influencing your decisions in ways you don't realize. There's evidence for this in Fallout 4. If you pay close attention to your Pip-Boy, if you watch it during certain quests, you'll notice that it sometimes displays information you shouldn't have access to. Quest markers appear before anyone tells you where to go. Locations are marked on your map before you discover them. And in some cases, dialogue options appear that suggest knowledge your character shouldn't possess. Information that wasn't shared with you, but that the Pip-Boy somehow knows. It's subtle, easy to dismiss as a gameplay convenience, but if you treat it as an in-universe phenomenon, it suggests that the Pip-Boy is receiving instructions, that someone is feeding you information, guiding you toward specific objectives. This connects to the theory about the player being part of an experiment. If Vault-Tec is still monitoring Vault Dwellers, if they're using the Pip-Boy network to track and influence behavior, then every player character in every Fallout game is a test subject. The vaults were experiments, we know that, but the experiments didn't end when you left the vault. They continued, expanded, became something larger. The wasteland itself is the experiment, and you're being guided through it, pushed toward specific scenarios, specific conflicts, specific choices, all so that Vault-Tec can collect data on how humans behave in extreme conditions. And if that's true, if the Pip-Boy is a control mechanism, then the question becomes, how much control does it have? Can it influence your thoughts, your emotions, your decisions? The Pip-Boy interfaces with your nervous system, can deliver drugs directly into your bloodstream through the Vault suit's medical systems, can stimulate or suppress neural activity. In Fallout 4, there are perks that affect your perception, your luck, your charisma, and these perks are delivered through the Pip-Boy, represented as software upgrades that modify your capabilities. But what if those upgrades aren't just enhancing your natural abilities? What if they're overriding them, replacing your instincts with programmed responses, turning you into something that's not quite human anymore? This is where the Fallout series becomes truly horrifying, because it suggests that free will might be an illusion, that every choice you make might be the result of programming you're not aware of. You think you're deciding whether to help the Brotherhood or the Railroad, whether to destroy the Institute or join them, whether to be a hero or a villain. But maybe those aren't your choices. Maybe they're options presented to you by the Pip-Boy, by Vault-Tec, by whoever's controlling the experiment, and maybe the real test isn't what you choose, but whether you ever realize you're being manipulated. Let's talk about one more mystery, one that's been present since the original Fallout, but has never been fully explored. The Master. In the first Fallout game, the Master was the primary antagonist, a grotesque fusion of human and machine who'd been transformed by FEV and had become convinced that humanity's only hope for survival was to be transformed into super mutants. The Master believed that super mutants were superior to human, stronger and more resilient, and that by converting everyone he could create a unified species that would survive the wasteland. He was defeated, his cathedral destroyed, and his army scattered. But the question that's never been answered is, was he wrong? The Master's plan was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. He believed that super mutants could reproduce, that they could create a sustainable population and eventually replace humanity. But he was wrong. Super mutants are sterile, unable to have children, and without a constant supply of FEV and human subjects, they can't maintain their numbers. When you reveal this to the Master, when you show him the evidence, he realizes his mistake and kills himself, accepting that his plan was doomed from the start. But what if the Master wasn't entirely wrong? What if super mutants, despite their sterility, are actually better suited to survive in the wasteland than humans? They're immune to radiation, resistant to disease, incredibly strong and durable. They can survive in environments that would kill a human in minutes. And while they can't reproduce naturally, they can be created through FEV exposure, which means that as long as FEV exists, super mutants can continue to exist. They're not a replacement for humanity. They're an alternative, a different path, a species that's adapted to the post-apocalyptic world in ways that humans haven't. This raises an uncomfortable question. If super mutants are better suited to the wasteland, if they're more likely to survive long-term, then is humanity's extinction inevitable? Are humans just a transitional species, something that existed before the war but can't exist after it? The Fallout games present humanity as resilient, as capable of rebuilding and adapting, but if you look at the evidence, if you consider how few humans have actually survived and how precarious their existence is, you start to wonder whether the series is actually documenting humanity's slow extinction. In Fallout 3, the capital wasteland has a population of maybe a few thousand people scattered across dozens of small settlements. In Fallout New Vegas, the Mojave has slightly more, but most of them are concentrated in New Vegas itself, and they're dependent on Mr. House's technology and the NCR's supply lines. In Fallout 4, the Commonwealth has a similar population, and they're constantly under threat from raiders, super mutants, and the Institute. None of these populations are growing. Birth rates are low, infant mortality is high, and most people don't live past 40. Humanity isn't thriving in the wasteland. It's barely surviving. Meanwhile, super mutants are everywhere. They're in every game, in every region, and they're not dying out. They're adapting, forming communities, developing cultures. In Fallout 2, you meet Marcus, a super mutant who's intelligent, reasonable, and has built a town where humans and super mutants live together peacefully. In Fallout 4, you meet Strong and Virgil, super mutants who retain their intelligence and their humanity despite their transformation. And in Fallout 76, you discover that some super mutants have been alive since the early days after the war, over 200 years, and they're still going strong. The evidence suggests that super mutants might outlast humans, that they might be the species that inherits the wasteland. And if that's true, then the Master wasn't wrong about his conclusion. He was just wrong about the timeline. Humanity won't be replaced through forced conversion. It'll be replaced through natural selection, through the slow process of extinction and adaptation. And in a few more centuries, the wasteland might be populated entirely by super mutants, ghouls, and other post-human species, with baseline humans existing only as a memory. A footnote in history. The species that destroyed the world and then couldn't survive in the ruins. This is the darkest interpretation of the Fallout series, the one that suggests the games aren't about humanity's resilience or its capacity for hope. They're about humanity's end, about the final days of a species that's already lost but doesn't know it yet. And you, the player, you're not the hero who's going to save humanity. You're a witness, documenting the decline, recording the last moments of a civilization that's already dead but hasn't stopped moving yet. Every vault you explore, every settlement you build, every faction you help, it's all temporary, all doomed to fail eventually. The Brotherhood will fall, the NCR will collapse, the Institute will be destroyed or will destroy itself. And in the end, when all the factions are gone and all the conflicts are resolved, the wasteland will still be there. Still hostile, still unforgiving. And the only things that will survive are the things that have truly adapted, the creatures and species that have embraced what they've become rather than clinging to what they were. The Fallout series has always been about the tension between hope and despair, between the belief that humanity can rebuild and the evidence that it can't. And maybe that's the real mystery, the one that will never be solved. Not whether humanity will survive, but whether it deserves to. Whether a species that destroyed its own world, that conducted horrific experiments on its own people, that created weapons capable of ending all life, whether that species has earned the right to continue. And the games don't answer that question. They just present the evidence and let you decide. And perhaps that's the most unsettling aspect of the Fallout universe. It's not just that humanity might be doomed, it's that humanity might deserve to be doomed, and the wasteland is simply the consequence of choices that were made long before the bombs fell. The nuclear war wasn't an accident, wasn't an unavoidable tragedy. It was the logical conclusion of a society that valued power over compassion, that chose weapons over diplomacy, that built vaults not to save people but to experiment on them. The pre-war world was already a dystopia, already a nightmare of corporate greed and government oppression and casual cruelty. The bombs just made it visible. There's a recurring motif in the Fallout series, something you see in every game but might not consciously notice. Skeletons. They're everywhere, in every building, every street, every location you explore. Skeletons sitting at dinner tables, skeletons lying in beds, skeletons huddled together in corners, frozen in their final moments. And if you pay attention to how they're positioned, if you look at what they were doing when they died, you'll notice something disturbing. Most of them weren't trying to escape. They weren't running for shelter, weren't fighting, weren't doing anything to save themselves. They were just continuing. Eating dinner, watching television, going about their daily routines as if nothing was wrong. This suggests that when the bombs fell, when the sirens went off and the missiles were incoming, most people didn't believe it was really happening. They'd been living under the threat of nuclear war for so long, had been told so many times that the end was coming, that when it actually arrived, They couldn't process it. They thought it was another drill, another false alarm, another day in a world that had been on the brink of destruction for decades. So they stayed where they were, kept doing what they were doing, and died without ever understanding that this time was different. The skeletons are a reminder that the Fallout universe isn't just about what happened after the bombs. It's about what happened before, about a society that had become so numb to the threat of annihilation that it couldn't recognize the real thing when it arrived. And that numbness, that inability to respond to existential threats, is still present in the wasteland. People in the Fallout games live surrounded by danger, by radiation and violence and death, and most of them have just accepted it. They don't try to change things, don't try to make the world better. They just survive, day by day, doing what they need to do to stay alive, and they've stopped imagining that things could be different. This is why the factions in Fallout are so important, and why they're all ultimately failures. The Brotherhood of Steel wants to preserve technology, but they hoard it rather than sharing it, and they're so focused on the past that they can't imagine a different future.